session of the 2023 Responsible Raw Materials Annual Conference. Over the course of the last few days, we have heard from a wide variety of phenomenal speakers, and my head is certainly full of lots of ideas, lots of, I guess, a certain amount of conflict as well, because people haven't necessarily been agreeing with one another. But that's the beauty of this forum, because through Responsible Raw Materials, we get to bring together lots of individuals who ordinarily might not find themselves in the same space. And so through this forum, we get to listen to one another, we get to debate lots of different questions. And of course, this year, we've been talking about material value chains, the criticality of trust. Now, if you haven't already found the website and seen that we've already loaded all of these talks up there so you can catch up in your own time. So I know that, of course, we live in a world that has multiple different time zones. And so for those of you, if it's the middle of the night, don't worry, you can go back to sleep because you can catch up with this later. But to show you where you can find all of this fantastic information, just go to our website, responsiblerawmaterials.com. And in here, not only, of course, will you find a link to this year's conference, which has the agenda with all of the fabulous individuals within it. What some of you will notice with your eagle eyes is that today, which is, of course, Friday, the 12th of May, the agenda has changed slightly, which is really exciting. We've got one or two extra speakers who we've managed to slot in at the last moment because, of course, we want to hear as many different perspectives, ideas, insights as possible. So I will walk you through who we have for this final session very, very shortly. But before I get to that, if some of you are wondering where on earth are these videos that you keep talking about? Well, if you go back to the top of the page and click on talks, what you will find is a whole series of videos from the last few days. And so you can go and click at random. So for example, so here's Kyle. So Kyle spoke to us yesterday afternoon. He was one of the last speakers, and you can see that his video has already been loaded. We've got his abstract and his biography up there as well. Depending on the speakers, some of them have given us extra material to put up on the website as well. So they're nice little packages for you that you can watch in your own time. Maximum, they're only about 20 minutes long. So it's very nice and easy to have with a cup of coffee or something like that. What we've also been doing is we've been categorizing all of the different talks. So if you think, you know what, today I feel like learning about tax, because of course that's what you would feel like doing. This is a case here where all the talks that have got something to do with tax that have been given over the last few years. So since 2020, when we first started doing this conference, so this is conference number 4, as you can see here, we've done lots on tax. We've done 2 talks on tax. On some of those other topics, of course, we've done many more, but feel free to go in and take a look at that. Another way of searching for those talks is to go up and click the little magnifying glass that we've got at the top, or the search button, and think, okay, I want to go and find the talk by Kyle. I'll hit return, and there is Kyle's talk. Okay, so you can search through all these videos as well. So it's a fantastic resource that's been created over the last few days, and certainly a lot of different organizations and individuals make use of this. I certainly go back and look at a lot of these videos as and when I have time, and I think, hang on, there was a very clever person about 3 years ago who gave great insight into something. I want to go back and take a look at that again. So with regards to those past events, we've got links to all of those as well. If you want to see what we got up to a few years back, and you do that by just clicking on past events. And you can see here just at the bottom of the page, our 2020 conference. So this was back in the midst of, I think it was probably the first lockdown for COVID, certainly the first lockdown that we had here in the UK. And Rose Clark, who is the co-founder of Responsible Raw Materials with myself, we thought, okay, hang on a second, let's get a load of people together to really discuss what does responsible raw materials actually look like. So that could be responsible exploration, responsible mining, processing, transportation, all the way through into investing, the different markets, recycling. How do you design products so they can actually make use of these raw materials and then be repurposed or recycled at the end of their life, etc. So how do we really move into raw materials within the circular economy as well? And that's what we explored in the first year of our conference. And we were delighted that one of the outputs was, yes, raw materials should be as responsible as possible. Funny that, in terms of that being one of the outputs. So that was back in 2020. And we had a lot of fun putting that together. And quite a lot of people asked us, okay, well, when are you doing your next one? When are you doing your next conference? And that was when we came up with the idea of doing our annual conference. So 2021 was when we said, okay, well, last year, we all thought, yeah, okay, responsibility is a good thing within this industry or this array of industries that we find along the value chain. But how on earth do we do it? You know, it's all very well saying, yes, that's a good idea, but how do we actually make that a reality? And so that's where the inspiration for the 2021 conference came from. And it was called the ESG Toolbox. And what we have in this conference is a wide collection of different tools, tips, tricks, techniques, ideas, etc., that came from many different individuals working within raw materials. So what you can almost see within the little infographic that we created was a wide variety of different stakeholders. So it might be everything from engineers and finance, commodity traders, environmentalists, activists, influencers, artisanal mining communities, etc., all saying, well, hey, this is what we do. And this is what works and this is what doesn't work. So lots and lots of great case studies, but then also those practical tools as well to say, let's make ESG a reality. So that was great. Then moving on to 2022, and this was a case where we said, right, okay, so yes, we know that raw materials need to be as responsible as possible. We know that it's difficult to make that reality, but we've got a whole load of tools that we can now raid in our toolbox. But is it really working, or what does this mean in that macro perspective? And back earlier on throughout 2021 and into the beginning of 2022, what had begun to happen within the climate change discussion was at COP26, which had happened in November 2021, mining as an industry was pretty much told, you're not welcome here because we don't see how you help climate change as a whole. And that was very interesting because, of course, for those people who work within raw materials, we know that, yeah, well, if you want to build a wind turbine, you need quite a lot of material that initially probably needs to come out of the ground below our feet. So how do we make sure that by creating all of the infrastructure, the batteries, etc., that we need for the energy transition, we actually create it all in a way that is as just and fair and sustainable as possible? So how do we actually do that? So yes, raw materials should have a very big seat at the table with regards to climate change and the energy transition. And so it was through the course of late 2021 into 2022 that this really began to come to the fore. And what we discussed during the 2022 conference was, okay, so what should mining's role be in helping to unlock that just energy transition? So not just allowing the energy transition to take place, but taking the opportunities that are posed by this change to say, okay, how do we make this as good as it possibly could be? So, for example, perhaps one of the biggest opportunities on the table is working out how do we dig cobalt out of the ground in the DRC in the most responsible manner? From a geological perspective, it makes huge sense to dig cobalt out of the ground in the DRC because the rocks are beautiful. But we also need to be very cognizant of all of those other threats and opportunities that need to be managed as well, which are incredibly complex. So there was lots of fantastic discussion, lots of challenging one another with regards to last year's conference. And some of the thoughts that came out of last year's conference have certainly gone on to influence various different papers, etc., around the world, which was great. So that then brings us to this year. and what we've been talking about in our 2023 conference, which of course is trust. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can begin to see some of our fabulous speakers who are going to be exploring this concept of, well, it's not really a concept, it's a vital aspect of raw materials that we have across the world. How do we create, or how do we maintain, or how do we build on trust across the entirety of materials value chains? And Ludovine and myself, we're going to attempt to summarize this conference later on today, which is going to be great, isn't it, Ludovine? This is always the moment of truth when we go, hang on, have we been listening for the past few days? Can we actually make sense of all of these thoughts that are going through our brains? Because what we've been speaking about, so on Tuesday, I keep trying to say Monday, but no, this year, the conference started on Tuesday, and that's because we had something called a coronation earlier on this week in the UK. So on Tuesday afternoon, we kicked off the conference with an opening from Minister Ghani. So she is the closest that we have to a mining minister here in the UK. And she opened the conference by explaining, okay, this discussion is really getting going now within the UK. And from a British perspective, we're a very small island. So she didn't say that, by the way. I'm saying that we're a small island. So we've only got so many rocks in the ground. But from a UK perspective, we need to make sure that raw materials are incorporated into trade agreements, into multilateral discussions, etc. So it's very much that global aspect with regards to raw materials. And so Minister Ghani teed up the discussion really nicely by saying, this isn't going to happen unless we have trust between lots of different parties who perhaps have never actually spoken to one another, and certainly haven't spoken to one another about rocks or raw materials. So how do we get that to happen? So in that first session on Tuesday afternoon, the notes that I've got here really reflect the aspect of trust, respect, understanding, transparency, and actually having the courage to be vulnerable and to say, when, hang on, I don't really understand something, let's talk about it, and let's come to some sort of understanding of saying, okay, how can we improve what we're doing? We also talked a lot about governance on Tuesday afternoon, and especially where ESG and sustainability has been incorporated, or is being incorporated, into the mineral governance codes, be they the ones under the CRISCO banner, so the ones that an exploration company or a mining company might use when speaking to, say, investors, but also at the UN level, where we're perhaps looking at more of a regional basis as well. So some fantastic talks there from Tuesday afternoon. Then coming along into Wednesday morning, and on Wednesday morning, we had, again, a fantastic array of talks from a wide variety of individuals. And this was a case where we started off with Professor Paul Ekins, who talked about not social license to operate, but sustainable development license to operate. And what does that mean from a financial basis as well? And financial models, economic models around the world. We heard from Elevine in Malawi, and so she shared with us insight with regards to, well, what happens when different groups of women get together? And so that critical mass, we can build infrastructure so we can take gems that we might be digging out the ground and process them to a higher level. So therefore, the value of those materials, when they're then sold, actually stays with those people who are doing the initial digging out of the ground, which is fantastic. And then we finished off with the likes of Jeff Townsend and Namely from the Critical Minerals Association, both in the UK and Australia, talking about trust within politics, which for some of us makes us smile slightly, because we think, hang on a second, do you trust a politician? Whereas actually from the political perspective, their currency is trust. And so I thought that was really, really interesting in terms of the summaries that we got there. On to Wednesday afternoon, and we kicked off with a lesson in listening, which I'm still recovering from, I think, because I was the guinea pig with regards to the beginning session of Wednesday afternoon. But really, we explored a number of different techniques in terms of listening and negotiation, and saying, okay, how do we actually build trust in that particular dialogue or in that sort of relationship? We looked at blockchain technology. So how can we improve the transparency of where raw materials come from? And we finished off with a fantastic talk, which had nothing to do with raw materials or mining whatsoever, but everything to do with trust. And John Crawley, who played a role in the Good Friday Agreement with regards to Northern Ireland 25 years ago, shared with us some of what went on behind the scenes to pull together different stakeholders who really, 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 really did not trust one another. So how can you create trust out of something that initially was so broken? So that was Wednesday afternoon. Thursday morning, what did we talk about on Thursday morning? So Thursday morning, we came back together and we had, again, some fantastic discussions from an awesome array of individuals. We talked about what does trust look like within research projects to do with mining? So especially when you bring together a geeky geologist and a geeky social scientist, we've been programmed in very different ways. So actually, how do you listen to one another and work out how can you pull together the best possible research and realize that actually some of your assumptions might not necessarily be correct initially because you don't necessarily have that background understanding, all the way through into what is going on in some of the really fantastic research in, say, Finland. So Kimmo, who is head of the Geological Survey in Finland, he came and shared with us some of the work that they are doing, which is really exciting. And then finally, we finished off with Gijsbert, who gave us insight into actually a wide variety of aspects. But the thing that is still making me giggle, Gijsbert, so thank you so much for sharing this with us. And I can see you in there in the attendees list. The difference perhaps between different cultures or people from different countries, and that visualization that if you had a Dutch person and a French person in a forest together, the Dutch person will be off picking mushrooms, but the French person will be standing back and saying, no, I'm looking for bears and spotting bears. Ludovine, who is more of the French persuasion, then took this a step further and said, no. They'll be stepping back and saying, no, this is what I'm in charge of, but then I'm on strike. But we could take this further. So if you want to see people laughing and being very politically incorrect, then go and watch that session. And it is meant with much love and respect. We're not being offensive to those different nations. But as Gijsbert has just said in the chat, yes, you're never going to lose the whole mushroom thing, Gijsbert, because it was just genius. It was awesome. That then takes us into yesterday afternoon, where we really got into the depths actually of the social science and what does trust mean in the world of social science. So Dr. Catherine McCallum and Dr. Mark Palmer, they both shared with us their research and their understanding, working a lot with the mining sector. What does trust look like? We also heard from Carlos from the Ministry of Mining in Chile. And so again, the practical, well, what does it look like from their perspective? And if you are looking for a case study of mining in a country and what is changing at the moment and what the different parts of government actually do with regards to mining, watch Carlos's talk, because it is an amazing and very succinct summary of what is happening in Chile at the moment. And that differs to somewhere like the UK, because mining in Chile is a very big deal compared to in the UK, where most people haven't got a clue what it actually is. So watch Carlos's talk because it is absolutely fantastic. We then finished off yesterday's session with really getting to grips with what happens with communities within that exploration or that mining sphere, and Ron Rimmelman giving us insight into a case study of Alaska and the native corporations and the fact that the communities really do own that land. And so it's a very different relationship compared to other parts of the world. And then Carl Pierce really talking again about engagement mechanisms and how do you really listen and respect people that you're speaking with. And then finally finishing off with Cecilia, who gave us insights from the Philippines and actually Indeed Global, talking about community agreements and pros and cons with regards to those aspects as well. And again, it's all about respect and building those aspects of trust. So that's what we've been through over the last few days. And today we've got a fabulous lineup for you. We're going to start off with the fabulous Shiv, and I will let him introduce himself in very, very shortly. So in about 30 seconds time, Shiv will be over to your wonderful self. We're going to talk to Shiv about a number of different areas in which, again, trust and different aspects are really brought into anything from the lithium triangle in South America through to artisanal mining, climate change, etc. We're then going to go to the fabulous Josh Warner, who is in the middle of his final exams, by the way. So Josh, thank you so much for coming and joining us here today. Absolutely brilliant. And Josh has actually been working with Responsible Materials for a number of years well, we're all volunteers, by the way, but very much bringing that a much fresher perspective, to be honest, saying, but why on earth are people doing things that way? So thank you so much, Josh, and really looking forward to hearing what you've been putting together behind the scenes as well. Then across to Australia, because of course, what else would you be doing on a Friday evening? And to the fabulous Vanessa Richards, who's going to be giving us insight into the discipline of trust. So I wonder what that's going to include, but it's going to be fantastic. And then back here to Isis. Is Libby in the UK at the moment? Are you here, Libby? You are, because Libby could be anywhere, to be honest, on the planet at any point in time. So Libby's going to give us insights into some of the bits and pieces. I won't tell everybody what it is yet, that BHP have been up to, which will be fantastic. Then we're going to hear from Transparency International Australia, and Anna Caballo is going to be joining us from there. And so you'll see that that's a new addition to our agenda. And the final new addition to our agenda is the fantastic Barbara Dissinger from Women in Mining International. And so she's going to give us some of her insights from her experience as well with regards to building trust with perhaps a slightly different array of stakeholders compared to some of those who we've spoken about earlier on this week. And of course, finally, Ludovine and myself are going to attempt to summarise what is it that we've actually learnt during the course of the week. But don't worry, Ludovine, we've got a few hours until we get there yet. So we're going to try and bring it all together. So with that, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us here this morning. I'm really looking forward to our last few talks because I'm sure there is an awful lot more still to learn. I should also, by the way, say that Raymond, you are more than welcome. You are our mascot, and we will see him feature regularly during this call. And Ludovine feeling embarrassed that her cat has walked past the screen, but we love him dearly, Ludovine. We do. Excellent. So sorry. It's brilliant. So with that, what we're going to do is I'm going to welcome Shiv to our virtual stage that we have here. So Shiv, if you would like to, he's already here. If you'd like to find that mute button, I'm going to encourage everybody to give you a round of applause for the fabulous Shiv. And Shiv, if you would like to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what your background is, and then I have one or two cheeky questions to ask you in a little fireside chat. Shiv, over to yourself.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shiv Unka. I'm a senior consultant at Intandem. We are a boutique strategy and innovation consultancy based in London. A lot of my experiences have spanned across multiple industry sectors, including defence, government, national security, and more recently, e-mobility and aviation, and also aerospace. A lot of the work we do involves kind of decoding complex, ambiguous problem spaces down, synthesizing some of those insights with kind of deep quant research techniques, and then providing strategic analysis and recommendations. A lot of the work is focused on sustainability and net zero initiatives. Previous projects in the past have included looking at the EV and lithium-ion supply chains and really doing a deep dive into kind of where the materials are coming from, understanding process and manufacturing improvements and how those could be made. And then the most recent project is involved looking at climate change and the links to ASM and migration of people in some of these countries, and the main focus has been on Africa and LATAM. And we've also been looking at the kind of influence of serious and organized crime, particularly within these supply chains. So super interesting topic, and yeah, really excited to dive into it further.
Fantastic, Shiv. I'm very jealous of what you get to do every day. I think that sounds absolutely fantastic. Now there were lots of different topics that you mentioned there that I thought, oh, it would be really cool to hear about them. But should we start off with climate change, I guess, to begin with? So what is it that you've been doing with regards to that?
So in regards to climate change, I think it's such a massive and complex topic, and we've really been looking at it from two perspectives. So from a macro angle, looking at it from the kind of global green energy transition, and understanding the increase in demand and kind of the associated supply dynamics for materials such as kind of the lithium, cobalt, everything that's needed for batteries and the EV transition. We're also looking at it from a micro lens. So this is now looking at kind of the localized regional impacts to the biophysical impacts of the climate. So this could be kind of extreme weather events, prolonged drought, unpredictable rainfall. How do these factors actually compound and affect traditional livelihoods in some of these areas where they are more susceptible and vulnerable to the impacts of these of climate change, particularly in Africa and LATAM, where by chance these areas are obviously very rich in minerals, but they're also very vulnerable to climate change. And what do these impacts actually mean for the supply chains, and kind of the transition, and how does that impact, for example, our transition for EVs and green energy?
And so what are you finding with regards to that in terms of, I guess, that vulnerability? Is that exacerbating some of the, I guess, the uncertainty with regards to the supply chain itself, or what are you finding?
For sure. So over the course of the last couple of months, we've been doing lots of interviews with SMEs, speaking to NGOs, think tanks, charities, migration experts, mining organizations on the ground, really trying to build up a picture of what is actually happening from a climate perspective on the ground, how are local communities being affected. And what we've seen, particularly in North Africa, North and West Africa, is the changes in weather over the period of the last 5, 10, 15 years. It's affecting traditional livelihoods of agriculture, farming, and pastoralism. These people tend to kind of work in season, so they'll spend part of the year doing farming and agriculture, part of the year they'll do some ASM. But what we're seeing now is, because of these changes in the climate, their livelihoods are being disrupted. As such, they have increased number of crop failures. They can't sustain their cattle, for example, and they are being pushed into other sources to try find other sources of income. And more often than not, ASM presents an opportunity for them to actually secure a stable income. The issue we're seeing is, with ASM, it's quite susceptible to organized crime. There's lots of kind of bribery, corruption, and criminality that occurs within these supply chains. And particularly when we start thinking about critical minerals and the demand for them, this problem is only going to scale up in the future.
And so with that, Shiv, in terms of the artisanal and small scale mining, obviously, by no means is all of it linked to criminal activity, etc. But what are you beginning to find there in terms of the organized crime element within it?
So I think from our perspective, there's lots of different nuances that are happening within the supply chains of these minerals, and it's not just kind of one mineral in particular. It can span across kind of the gold, tin, tantalum, tungsten, cobalt. It's across kind of the whole spectrum. And from a criminality perspective, it's not just one type of crime that's kind of happening. It's everything from human rights abuses in terms of forced labor and debt bondage, sexual violence and exploitation, all the way up to kind of the other side of the supply chain, where we are seeing more of the kind of professional white collar type crime, where you've got your money laundering and human trafficking, and bribery and corruption involved as well.
We're starting off today on a really happy note, aren't we, with regards to all of this? So Shiv, is this something which, I mean, I know that when we had our first conversation with regards to that, so there's the areas that I guess everyone's talking about, such as the cobalt, the tin, tantalum, tungsten, gold, etc. But you were also asking about some of those materials that are on the sort of critical minerals list, such as lithium. So are you finding any links between organized crime and lithium, or not really?
So lithium's a really interesting one, because just because of the material and how it is mined, particularly if we talk about South America, it's predominantly in the brine form, and it doesn't lend itself to being extracted artisanally. You need kind of very large scale mining operations to really make a profit in that sense. When it does come in rock form, that's kind of found elsewhere in the world. Zimbabwe, for example, have a sizable lithium rock deposit. that it's still relatively untapped. And kind of when we do look at countries and understand kind of their indexes for kind of corruption, bribery, etc., it's one of those countries that is fairly high on the list. And in the future, where we know we'll need a lot more lithium, it's one of those countries where the susceptibility for organized crime to actually have an influence on the lithium supply chain there is quite high. And we want to be understanding what more can be done from a kind of regulation perspective, from a framework perspective, actually from responsible sourcing and extraction of this material. How can we actually prevent some of these crimes happening?
Mm-hmm. And so with that, and I'm going to immediately bring in some of the questions we've got coming in the chat. So thank you, Vanessa, in terms of those brilliant questions that are coming in here. So Shiv, with regards to, say, the kind of controls that could be put in place around, say, lithium, other critical materials, etc., is there anything that we can pull across from, say, the world of diamonds to avoid people further down that value chain inadvertently purchasing those materials that perhaps have some sort of connection to criminal activity?
I think we are making progress in regards to these things. I know, again, for the diamond perspective, we've not really looked into it too much, but I think there's a process called the Kimberley process, and there's a few other things. From a minerals perspective, the OECD and the EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, I think I've got that right, are making good progress with frameworks and guidelines that are in place. But at the end of the day, it becomes up to the countries to sign up to it, and then it becomes up to the organisations who are actually buying these materials to sign up and agree to actually account for doing the appropriate levels of due diligence. There does become a point in the supply chain where the actual end-to-end is so long and complex. Inevitably, there is going to be some areas where you just aren't going to be able to trace, and I think it's those areas where we need to actually dive a little bit deeper in and focus on understanding at what point do these illicitly mined minerals actually enter the supply chain.
And so with this, Shiv, in terms of, because it's an incredibly complicated system that we're looking at here with huge amounts of uncertainty and change and everything that's happening within it, when you're undertaking this work, and you don't need to disclose them because I suspect that they're sensitive, are you undertaking this work for, I don't know, car manufacturers or governments or mining companies or NGOs? Who are you doing this work for?
So at the minute, this is kind of work that we're just doing because it's a really very interesting topic. It's relevant to a number of different industries across the board, and it will continue to do so. So kind of being on the front foot and understanding what's happening where, why, what initiatives are being taken in place. I think it's a valuable topic for all industries to be aware of.
And so I guess as well, then actually, Vanessa, do you want to come to the stage? So we'll spot if you're happy to do so, because your next question there is fantastic. Do you want to pose that to Shiv?
So, Shiv, this may be well outside of your potential remit, but are you aware of anything that's underway to address the root cause? So you described really well that, the fact that people's traditional livelihoods from farming are being disrupted by climate change, and therefore they're having to turn to this difficult, dangerous, dirty work. Is there anything that's being done to address the root cause of that, essentially? Obviously not just protecting from climate change, but creating different means for people to make a living wage, basically.
That's a fantastic question. It's unfortunately not one that I can comment on with kind of full confidence, but no, I think that question, if kind of posed as a possible kind of approach to actually how we could combat some of these things, is a great way of actually looking at it. In these areas, particularly in North Africa and the Sahel region, where there is lots of disruption to the traditional livelihoods, these people don't really have many other sources of income. So they are being driven towards ASM and other activities that are associated with those supply chains. Because it's relatively simple, you don't need the barriers to entry are really low. You don't need a lot of equipment. It's a steady, stable income that has been happening for many years. It's almost part of the local culture to be doing ASM in some of these areas. So unless there are new opportunities, whether those actually do come from charities, NGOs, or kind of governments themselves, it is a good way to kind of understand what alternative sources of income and kind of just living there are in those areas.
Thanks for that, Shiv, and thank you for the question, Vanessa. I'm just going to pull Ludovine into our little discussion as well, because I think it's always nice, isn't it, when we bring other people in? And because Ludovine, you've got some insight to this as well. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Shiv, for your insights. I think one of the points that's becoming clear, at least in the African jurisdictions where I have a little bit of experience, is that we're all going to have to learn to live with informality. So informality in the mining sector is only going to increase. It's going to increase because we have learned a lot of tricks, good and bad, in the last gold rush. And at this moment, we're also seeing a lot of emerging production of critical minerals, or little sort of pockets of understanding of local geology that's gearing for smaller scale production. So there's a real thought process around, okay, informality is here to stay. How do we decouple, and I don't want to use that word because it's, but how do we decouple informality from organized crime? And I think one of the interesting things there is the idea of creating alternative commercial routes rather than looking at livelihoods. And there's some good, bad, and ugly in that sector as well. So I don't want to pick on them, but like DRC just announced a big JV with the UAE on gold. The problem is that was never negotiated with civil society. So you've now got a whole bunch of negative reactions to that in DRC. There's other there's other initiatives going. What I'd love to get from you, Shiv, is a lot of this means that we're redrawing some of our favorite lines on the map. So the concept of sovereignty, how we address these issues, within the spectrum of a country, that's really shifting because this is an essentially cross-border issue. So I was wondering what's your view on that? And that's another trust equation right there to be added to the original trust equation, which was multiplied to infinity, just in case we were nervous already.
No, for sure. Again, yeah, I completely resonate with those thoughts. When we think about critical minerals, there is only a certain amount of minerals in each country, and everybody wants a piece of the pie, I guess. It will kind of come down to understanding how much is actually needed, understanding supply chain, supply and demand dynamics, and future projections, and understanding, are there alternative ways in which we could use these minerals? So looking at alternative battery technologies that don't require lots of cobalt or lithium, for example. From that's kind of one angle of looking at it. Looking at it from another perspective in terms of the lithium triangle, where we think about that's got kind of 54% of the world's lithium reserves at the minute, and Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, they are kind of in talks to almost create an OPEC version of the lithium triangle, right? This could have real benefits for those countries at the minute, because they don't do too much of the lithium refining themselves. It's generally always shipped to the east, where it's refined, and then it's shipped back over. These things are obviously contributing to the climate change aspect with emissions. If countries are able to set up the correct infrastructure with responsible investments, and actually maintain their own sovereignty of manufacturing and refining some of these materials, I think there's lots and lots of benefits that could be passed on to local communities and the nations themselves.
Shiv, if I can just build on what you're saying and kind of say, right, okay, so it's a hugely complicated system that we're looking at. When you started your introduction, it was a case of, right, so what you get to do every day is to decode and understand what's going on in there. Do you have any, I mean, are you allowed to give us any insight into how you do that? Because it's by understanding this complexity that we can maybe then go, okay, I now trust what I'm looking at. So now let's get on and maybe do something about it. Can you give us any insight to that?
I think our processes generally begin with just doing a kind of a horizon scanning of what's actually happening out there. That's kind of desk-based research, literature reviews, but also where the strengths really come in is the qual research that we do. So we reach out to a broad network of SMEs around the world. I think I mentioned before, we speak to NGOs, think tanks, researchers, academics, people who are on the ground. For this work we've just done, we spoke to 15-20 different NGOs and people that are actually in the field day in, day out, at these mine sites, doing investigations and unpicking some of these issues. So that's kind of where we get the real insights from. It's speaking to people on the ground who are actually seeing this with their own eyes. And it's really powerful to actually get that perspective, because you often don't get that when you are doing just desk-based research.
And then I guess I'm making the assumption then you collate all this research together and then turn it into some form of communication that somebody who maybe doesn't have any background or understanding in it can then understand. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Sorry to go.
Yeah, we take in account for all of these different things, and of course, it's never going to be the end complete truth, but it's going to be a good perspective based on the here and now of the work that's been done.
And just final question for you, Shiv. Do you have any hints and tips on how to formulate that communication so that somebody who's maybe actually is very anti what you're trying to tell them then goes, actually, this is really interesting? Any hints on that communication side?
I think it's great to be upfront about what assumptions you're making at the start of the piece of work. So outlining what you kind of have assumed to be in scope and out of scope. That way you set yourself a boundary or an envelope of where the focus should be. Because as you said before, this is such a massive and complex topic. You can't just cover everything. You need to bound yourself and look at one or two particular themes and then kind of ground yourself within those, and then assume everything else is out of scope. That way what you are looking at is a kind of a specific element of one area that's kind of refined and to that point.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Shiv. So make sure you're not trying to solve world peace in one go and actually give yourself something that is perhaps a bit more manageable with regards to that scope. So Shiv, thank you so much for coming and joining us here today and providing some of the insight that you've gained recently from the work that you've been up to. Absolutely fantastic. Round of applause, everybody, for fabulous Shiv. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Great. So we're going to go from that big complex world to another big complex world, and that is the world of Josh Warner, who is a fantastic individual who's been working with us for a long time now. As I mentioned, he's in the middle of his final exams, and so massive thanks, Josh, for coming along and being with us here today. Josh is going to give us insight into something that he's been working on for a little while now, and I'm going to hand the stage across to you. So Josh, if you want to share that screen and introduce yourself, I will relinquish the reins. And actually, the end note from that conversation we shared was a lovely segue.
It was, yeah.
Communication is the key. Over to you, Josh.
Cool. Thank you very much. It's a bit weird, honestly, to be on this kind of end of things before, but I'm very thankful for it. So yeah, I'm Josh. I'm a final year Earth and Planetary Science student at Imperial College London. And I just kind of wanted to briefly share what I kind of thought was one of the biggest problems in mining and one of the biggest problems that mining faces, kind of from my perspective as someone who's recently, fingers crossed, going to be finishing my course, all being well, got 2 more exams to do. So yeah, this kind of came from, this is going to sound a bit boring, like in a party conversation, but when I speak to some friends sometimes at parties, and I asked them, can you name like 5 mining companies? I just out of my own curiosity, just kind of wanting to see like what people's thoughts are. And not a single person can name like one mining company. And I thought, okay, great. Like maybe it's just the friends I'm speaking to. But then I asked someone on my course who does basically geology, and they can only name one, which I found a bit concerning. But I kind of made me realize like there is no kind of understanding of the importance of mining with people generally, and even within my university department by itself, which is a bit unusual considering how important of an industry it is globally. You know, the phrase goes, if you can't grow it, you have to mine it. So I kind of wanted to give this talk to kind of share this perspective and also offer a solution, potential solution. But before I begin, I've made like some pictures and like logos of what I want to communicate. They're not like, I'm not working with any brands or anything, so I'm not trying to, it's not alluding to any real life companies and organizations. Please do not sue me. I have not started paying off my student loan yet. It would not be good to do that. So, okay. So why I'm giving this talk generally. I'm going to say some points which I think are relatively uncontroversial with people here on this panel. So first of all, we need metals for the green energy transition, whether it's lithium for car batteries or your copper for your electric vehicles or wind turbine blades, you need to get metals from it. And there are kind of 2 ways you can get these metals. You can either recycle them or you can mine them. And currently, recycling is not enough. We don't have enough of this metal recycled to not need mining anymore. So as a result, yeah, we need mining. So these kind of like logical steps. And I would argue that that's pretty well understood. But then this is from my perspective of my personal views of what people just generally think about mining in the general public. So there's an agreement, yeah, we need metals for the green energy transition. You hear it on the news, your lithium for your car batteries or your shortage for chips is due to like mining shortages. They understand that metals are important for the green energy transition. You know, you can recycle metal. Scrap metal recycling is quite a big thing in the UK. You hear about it, you see people like collecting scrap. There's an understanding of that. However, there seems to be kind of a lack of understanding that mining can also be a source of metals. When people think mining, generally, this is quite a UK-centric view, but people tend to think coal mining because that's kind of the industry that happens there. So, and there's also to kind of that disconnect. And also there's not really an understanding that recycling at the moment is not enough. So as a result of these 2 kind of points, people tend to think we don't need mining. Well, that's fair enough, but, well, I don't think it's fair enough, but why is that the case? So I very much believe that this is kind of a result of a lack of understanding about the importance of mining in the general public. But this is no one's fault. If we start going around and saying to people on the street, why can't you name me a sediment hosted or deposit type? They're going to be like, well, what are you talking about? What does that even mean? So this is no one's fault. And it's on us as an industry to fix this. But this is not something where we need to go and kind of like take control of the narrative, because this is not like a greenwashing thing. You have to kind of just put our perspective out there. So I think right now at the moment, there's a lot of anti-mining talk going on. But if we just kind of share the importance of mining with the public, then that can kind of balance out. But it's not, it's trying to emphasize that it's not something where we go out, we take control of the perspective, don't let like opposite views happen. I think it's something, it's on us as an industry to fix by kind of bringing everyone together and talking about it, like events like this, but talking to the public and stuff. But some of the consequences of this lack of understanding about the importance of mining. Well, first of all, it's harder generally for mining companies to get funding. And so there's less options for smaller mining companies as well. As at the OECD conference, hearing about small mining companies finding it hard to access funding because they're kind of viewed just completely negatively by public. And instead of people asking questions like, can responsible mining be beneficial, kind of taking a more nuanced perspective, these kind of conversations don't even happen. Like at OECD, like Sarah said, like these conversations are happening. How are you going to be talking about the importance of wind turbines and solar panels if you're not going to also acknowledge the fact you need metals to do that, and how you're going to do it responsibly? So people kind of see this and just say, well, no, all mining bad. There's no nuance, there's no kind of further discussion. And when you stop talking about it, then you can't kind of work to be better. Thirdly, there's kind of a lack of interest as well in joining the industry. And I think this is something which McKinsey put out a report on recently. You can kind of see how mining is ranked the worst, as the most like unattractive for young people wanting to join the industry. And it's also interesting to note that oil is slightly better. And it got me thinking, like, why is this the case? So these are pictures of 3 petrol stations in the UK. And this is not, I'm not saying it's a confirmed reason or not, but it's just what I think maybe the reason for why oil is doing slightly better. When you're going to fill up your petrol from your petrol station, you see these brands, you see these companies, you're making the association of, I'm driving a car, I'm getting petrol, it comes from Shell, it comes from BP, it comes from Esso. You're kind of linking these 2 industries, and oil has a really bad rap. Like you see in negative news all the time. Yet this is an industry where has quite a strong public advertisement campaign. There's stuff on TV with Esso saying, we'll help you buy, I don't know, a bicycle to get to work or something. I don't know, I don't think they said that, but like some sort of transportation thing. They didn't say you're going to buy your bike, but they kind of allude to being more climate focused, I guess, than mining companies, and all kind of willing to be more progressive. And I'm not saying mining companies aren't, but plenty of them are. It's just there's no kind of communication of this with the public. And so when you've got people negatively criticizing oil companies and gas companies, but then also seeing, well, yeah, I'm going to my petrol station, I'm filling up my car, and I'm filling up from Shell, from BP, or from Esso, or some other companies, they're making that link. So that's kind of why I think that potentially oil and gas may be kind of more attractive. People are kind of more aware of it, more aware of like its positives. But that's just quite my own opinion. So going forward, I think it's quite clear that the importance of mining needs to be communicated to the public. But how do you kind of like make that tangible link between your products and mining companies? Well, this is kind of where TerraTrace comes in. This is an idea initiative I'm working on. But the idea is potentially you could use like a package labeling system in the same kind of way where it works on the food logic on the next couple of slides, but you would have your metal, kind of the standard that's kind of doing this reporting, and kind of an overall responsibility score. Of course, this is a massive simplification. There's loads of challenges to actually getting this working. Like Leanne Kemp earlier this week gave a brilliant talk about how it's currently the current challenges that people are facing doing this, and blockchain and how it could be used. But this is a way, I believe, where people can start to make that connection when they're going out buying a phone or buying a bottle, that what they're holding in their hand has metals in it, first of all, and also comes from the ground somewhere. And you can potentially scan a QR code, learn more about the different mine organizations and companies if you want to learn more information. But what is key, I think, about this is you don't need to have an understanding of metals and mining practices to kind of know whether something is being done more responsibly or not. In the same way that I'm not a food nutrition expert, right? So these are in the UK, I don't know if this is the same around the world, but you have food labels on packaging and products. And nutrition is an immensely complex field of study, yet they've found a way to simplify it down. Of course, this is not going to be true for everyone. It's not always going to be the case that you need this amount of sugar depending on your different conditions and stuff. So it's just a reference guide. It's just an initial step for people to start making more informed decisions about things. So it's just to me an example of how you can kind of simplify quite complex topics down. It's obviously not perfect, and neither would this be, honestly. Like, how can you say that copper's got sustainability score of 7.6, but it's trying to get that initial step. And crucially as well, it's accessible for people who don't understand mining. They can see that and make decisions. If you start advertising this kind of way, doing this to start advertising it and doing this package labeling system, there's some benefits. People can make more informed purchases in the same way food. You don't obviously, if you're going to choose, sometimes I choose to have a pizza. That's like my own choice. So it's just, you can make the more informed decision and more purchase if you want. Also, there's going to start to be, I believe, a differentiation of mining companies. Right now, if you're a really well-run mining company and a really poor mining company, there's no kind of real difference viewed by the public between the two of them. It's just kind of viewed as all bad. But if you can start to differentiate that, then you'll be like, okay, we need copper mining. But if we're going to need copper mining, let's do it well. Then also, I think it's quite a big problem with the amount of reporting standards out there. Hopefully, over time, this is going to kind of come all together, and kind of getting these standards out there to the public, I think, is one way of doing that. You can kind of say, for example, Fairtrade, they've got all these different things, but they're kind of under one umbrella. They do gold and they do bananas and other things, and chocolate. So yeah, standards can become more aligned, and commodity producers can be more rewarded for being more responsible. So these are my conclusions, kind of run through this talk. I think the lack of understanding is damaging, ultimately, or regardless of whatever industry that you're in. It is preventing small mining companies from gaining access to funds to be able to help work in their local communities. The lack of understanding is also no one's fault, like I said before, but it's on us as an industry to change that. Mining also needs to be more visible now. If we're going to continue to have COP conferences, you need to start talking about mining, and you need to start including it in your discussions, which I think is an uncontroversial opinion on this panel, but I think the general public need to be more aware of it. And mining as an industry needs to have more of an interface with the public. Otherwise, it's just going to continue doing what it's doing and continue receiving public criticism. But that's just not a way to go forward. And you have to communicate this with the public. All's good and well doing this on panels and having mining codes that are kept within the industry. That is great. We're holding ourselves accountable. But then when people are not talking about this, or not even acknowledging the fact that you need metals, it's going to cause other problems. And finally, when you communicate with people, it has to be very accessible. If it's not accessible and you start having systems where it requires almost like a degree to understand what you're saying about it, people are just not going to pay attention. And it needs to be in a format where it's very simple and you can just easily make decisions. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for listening. I did kind of just brush through it, but yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Josh. Everybody, a round of applause for the fabulous Josh Warner. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Now, please post your questions into the chat or into the Q&A. I've got a couple of things for you, Josh. And so I guess, you know, if you think about a fair trade banana or whatever, me as the end user who's about to eat that banana, the choice, etc., and the understanding is in my hands. And I guess what you're doing here is you're saying, well, how do you make it easier for that end consumer to understand where the thing that they're holding on to, where it actually comes from? And so it's through that where you've actually got some like direct and indirect benefits. So thinking about who is the person who needs to put this information on the tin or on the iPhone or whatever it is, I guess, does that sit with that manufacturer or whatever that thing is that correct?
Yeah, so it would kind of be almost like a more of like an opt-in system if you want to share this information initially. But I think crucially what I was trying to get across in the presentation is that mining does, as an industry, need to be more visible to the general public. It needs to have more of an interface with the general public, and it needs to be able to share what it's doing with the public. And right now, there's only ever negative news. There's never any positives. And if, for example, oil companies, even if there is only negative news, at least when people are filling up their car, they know what that oil is actually doing. They know why oil companies exist. But mining companies, they don't have any of that. You don't have any of that kind of, if you want to go buy metal for something, you just kind of assume it comes from like B&Q, which is like a home, or other places, which is like a Home Depot place. It's like you're not making that connection with what you're actually holding. It comes out of the ground somewhere, and that involves like people's livelihoods and the technology and the work that goes behind it. So yeah, what I kind of really wanted to emphasize in the talk was just there needs to be kind of change in this way now, and it has to be done to the public. And but it would involve people kind of manufacturers want to share that information, put it on their devices so people can get more informed. That should answer your question. So I'm just like
no, it's great. Thanks, Josh. And so you've got the kind of outwards communication and that sharing and actually treating people with respect to say you can make your own mind up with regards to this. But I think there's another thing here, and that is one of the themes that we've been looking at this week in terms of creating trust within the sectors as a whole. Is this the theory that if a mining company is acting in a more responsible way, then the product that they're producing should get a premium? So, for example, copper that has been dug out the ground, processed, etc., in a way that is providing all of those sustainable benefits, etc., to the community, to the environment, that should fetch a slightly higher price at market compared to something where goodness knows what has happened to it.
Yeah.
And I guess that this transparency that you're putting on the table here is a mechanism to try and create that differentiation, because there are lots of people who be saying, look, we should get this differentiation. In some cases, we're seeing case studies where that's happening, but really when people are being truly honest, that differentiation hasn't started yet. So is this another thing here, Josh, in terms of some of that kind of indirect benefits that
Yeah,
you're beginning to get that drive?
Yeah, so I think the reason why there's not a lot of companies are seeing that benefit is just a lack of awareness from people, like the end consumer. As the end consumer becomes more educated about what they're actually purchasing and where it comes from, then I believe they're going to start asking more questions about, or putting more pressure on the companies who are sourcing or producing these like products. Like, where are you getting your materials from? What are the practices that are going on when you're doing this? Can you guarantee there's no child labor in your product, etc., etc.? So it's once people start becoming more aware of that, then these kind of things are going to start happening, the price differentiation. But to get people more aware of that in the first place and start having these conversations, you need to kind of tell them that mining and metals are important, make them aware of the fact that you have metals in your phone, which sounds like a really obvious thing, but I just don't think that many people even think about it. It doesn't even cross their mind. And yeah, so that price differentiation is a benefit that will happen. And I think it is something that needs to happen, because ultimately, if you've got a fully electric fleet and you're producing 1 kilogram of iron ore, at the end of the day, that's worth basically the same as 1 kilogram of iron ore from a place that's doing it in a much worse way. But that needs to start making, that change needs to happen, basically. People need to start realizing those two things are separate, and it's no good just keeping with industry when we know that ourselves. At the end of the day, the public are the people who are going to be paying for this. And so they need to be the ones who actually know that. So,
fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much, Josh. Putting the power in the hands of those end users, absolutely fantastic. So everybody, please put your hands together for the fabulous Josh Warner. Thank you very much. Brilliant. Back to your exams. Fantastic. Awesome. So we're going to go from Josh, who's sitting here in London, all the way to the other side of the planet, to Australia, and the fantastic Vanessa Richards, who is going to give us insight with regards to the discipline of trust. So everyone, please put your hands together for the fabulous Vanessa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you. Sorry, apologies. I have a very old-fashioned clock in the background that's just letting me know that it's 6 o'clock in Australian time. Okay, so hello to everyone, and thank you to Sarah and Rose and everyone else at Setala for the opportunity to speak. My name's Vanessa Richards. I'm a consultant and I work in internal and external reporting and governance around all aspects of non-financial value. So from the vital and engaging world of communication that Josh has spoken about, we're moving to the migraine-inducing world of reporting. I wanted to share some thoughts on what we can learn from the practical discipline that financial markets have developed in order to create trust, not just in public reports, but also in the financial information that organisations use to make decisions themselves internally. I'm interested in how those lessons might be useful to build trust around the creation of non-financial value in areas such as biodiversity or social licence or decarbonisation. In particular, and this may cause a few people to go and make themselves a cup of tea until this talk is over, I want to talk to you about accountants. So I'm a communicator by trade. I've had what has been a genuine pleasure of working with accountants for many years, helping them to articulate what they do and why it matters to their clients, to the media, to investors and other audiences. The reason that anybody's ever paid me to do that is not just that the subject matter can be a bit complicated or that accountants are not always great at explaining things. To be fair, most of us are pretty bad at explaining our own areas of expertise. A big reason is that what they do matters. It is and always has been at the centre of trust that underpins successful societies. So, a brief history lesson. Accounting developed in parallel with complex societies from as far back as we can see. It was the catalyst for the development of writing 8,000 years ago in Sumeria. It underpinned the development of the alphabet by Phoenicians who used it to keep track of international trade. Egyptian pharaohs appointed bookkeepers to manage royal warehouses and auditors to check them. And if they found any shortfall, the bookkeepers got fed to the Nile crocodiles. So if you look about you, you will see that this role is still the same today, not the crocodiles, I hope not anyway, but the centrality of accounting and accountants to underpinning trust in transactions across markets, across society, across a complex society. There was a very tolerant and wise partner at the firm of accountants I worked at who was once listening to me grumble about work, and he said, if you ever doubt that what you're doing matters, look at the places where accountants have no influence. It's the foundation of transparency, and without it, there's no accountability. And I've seen this echoed again and again. At the moment, there's a shortage of accountants worldwide, and that has led some commentators, Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, for example, to suggest that the future of capitalism is under threat. Now, I'm not sure I would go quite as far as suggesting that the collapse of society will be brought about by too few accountants, but I do think we need to learn from them if we're going to meet the unprecedented set of challenges that we're facing. I'll give you 3 reasons why. First of all, complexity and rapid change require a unity of purpose, and that must be built on trust. Anyone who's worked in climate or environmental strategy or reporting knows that the goalposts are moved every week. Navigating that requires everyone to believe that those who they are working with are also pushing towards the same goal. Secondly, your customers, suppliers, partners, communities, governments, everyone needs to know that the choices we're making are the right ones, and that the things that we will inevitably have to sacrifice are worth it. In that, the fundamental importance of measuring and verifying value is crucial. And thirdly, you now need to justify your place in the world, your right to use our collectively precious resources. Being competitive is no longer the only criteria for survival. People want to know what contribution your organisation is making to the world now and for the future. So, how do we take this idea of accounting and what's been built around it and apply it to the messy and slippery world of non-financial value? For me, it comes down to expertise, probity, authority, and access. So, expertise first. We need expertise in monitoring, measuring, and reporting on value. And I think what Shiv was talking about, absolutely spot on for this. We need to understand, we need to have information, and we need to understand what that information means. So things like carbon emissions and forecasts are obvious examples of performance measures, but we've got a bunch of others that are coming along behind, measures of biodiversity, soil health, water, community resilience. We could name dozens of others. None of these metrics are straightforward. None of them are plug and play. They all require analysis and commitment to ensuring that they reflect reality. This isn't just to ensure that your own decision-making as an organisation, a business or a society is sound, although that's important. You can expect any one of these metrics to be subject to scrutiny and from a range of sources. So take the ongoing issue of methane, for example, here in Australia. The International Energy Agency, the University of New South Wales, a bunch of other people have used satellite data to measure methane emissions from Australian coal mines and gas production. Their findings suggest that emissions could be up to 60% higher than is currently reported by the industry. Now, no one's saying that Australian coal miners are deliberately misreporting emissions, but it does raise the question of whether the industry has robust measurement systems in place. And if they don't, why not? And if they don't know that they don't, why not? Why hasn't that been raised and addressed? Why isn't that a priority? And it may be that it's just something that hasn't come to the attention of management. There is always inevitably going to be issues and clashes of methodology, tracking and reporting. There will always be different ways of approaching it. You can skin a cat any number of ways. With goodwill and collaboration, you can address those and you can come to a workable solution for all parties. But repeated instances of these kinds of dissonances erodes goodwill and it erodes trust. And it's an open invitation for the industry or for individual companies to be blamed. Fundamentally, if your own people, your own systems, and or your management culture is not robust, that kind of scrutiny can be devastating. So the next thing I think we can learn from accounting is around probity. So accountants are trusted to take the role that they do in financial management because of the rigour and the probity that's expected from their profession. So accounting bodies around the world require members to abide by high professional and ethical standards. Accountants are expected to demonstrate integrity, objectivity, professional competence and due care, confidentiality, and professional behaviour, whatever that form that takes. Failure to do so can result in expulsion from the profession. It can also lead to higher standards being applied by courts in civil or criminal matters because of the role that accountants are seen to be taking in the world. The professions that manage non-financial areas of performance can draw on the model of this probity for how to develop similar trusted professionals. Engineers, environmental scientists, human resources, many other professions could have their own guardians to fulfill similar trust-building functions over their areas of expertise. How many of you could see a role for, say, a chartered biodiversity executive, for example? Having someone with responsibility, expertise, and reputation should be par for the course across every function that is responsible for curating non-financial performance. And the final point I think that you need to think about is authority and access. So, of course, in reality, there are many people who are already acting in these kinds of roles, and sometimes they're even seen to be and encouraged to act in that role by their organisation. But it's often an ad hoc response, and the responsibility of the role to maintain integrity is not always clearly defined. For example, where it might be considered acceptable for an accountant to advise the audit committee of the risks of a particular accounting treatment, there may be less support or no opportunity for an environmental manager to do the same in relation to water reporting. So I can see a future scenario where each critical area of performance has a function with explicit responsibility to maintain integrity. The skills of accountants, whether or not they're held by accountants, will be central to that. So, in summary, we will need all of our talents as historians, scientists, engineers, economists, writers, everyone, to establish the case for action and create consensus. But without measuring and verifying the value delivered by that action, courses cannot be corrected and consensus will not be maintained. So accountants alone cannot save the world, but the world will not be saved unless we all have our own version of an accountant. So
I love it.
That's my 2 cents worth.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Everybody, round of applause for the fabulous Vanessa Richards. And Vanessa, well, I mean, as we know, I'm originally a geologist, but nobody has ever quite inspired me so much as to go and learn to be an accountant. I mean, who knew?
Oh, yeah.
I can certainly think of a few people to feed to crocodiles potentially, though, if we can still keep that in circulation. So Vanessa, a question with regards to, I guess, the perhaps the access to authority and decision making, and perhaps trust in advice that's given that accountants have compared to, say, an environmental specialist or somebody else within the organisation. Is that something that has been built over 8,000 years of doing it, or what's the secret mechanism that makes the CEO or the board listen to the accountant more than the environmental specialist?
It is history. In part, it's because, you know, we are a generation, and this is part of the reason that I started my career in working with accountants to explain what they were doing, is that I think accounting in the maturity curve has got to the point where it's taken for granted. So it's understood that it's a thing. Not everyone looks inside the black box of accounting. Everyone just goes, it's a thing. It's important. We know it's important. Information gets spat out of that black box, and we take that information for granted. We think that money is real, for example. You know, we go, oh, that's worth 20 million. Gosh. You know, why is it worth 20 million? Who made that up? You know, it's come out of that black box, but nevertheless, it's, you know, there are good reasons why you should trust it, but not everyone understands what those reasons are. And we haven't yet got a black box for all of the things that we're working with. And there isn't the same level of rigor and the same depth of challenge and probity around it that you get in accounting. So, you know, for me, the classic example is your risk and audit committee. So as I said, you know, your accountant can, in coded terms or otherwise, go to the RAC, cut through your layers of management, or the auditors will do the same thing and say, the way that you want to present this number is not acceptable, frankly. You know, this number does not stack up to reality. Yes, you can find an argument, you can find an accounting treatment that will give you that number, but it's not real. And it doesn't, we won't be able to stand behind it if anyone challenges us on it. It's much harder for people to do that in any other area. And we need to build that. But to do that, you have to have people in roles where the organisations need to be prepared to challenge themselves around these things. And I've worked in the fields of climate change in particular, but also in other areas, around other areas of sustainability, around the governance and reporting that underpins those. And what you find is that because, you know, nobody wants to give bad news, and you don't have authority, like as if you've got the authority in your role, and if it's actually your job to give them the bad news, which, you know, in some ways I think the risk function could perform that role, then you can cut through and you can actually, you know, protect trust. Because what happens when you're saying everything's blue, the whole world is blue, everything inside our organisation is blue, and then somebody flies over the top of it with a drone and says, oh, I don't think so. That's it, you know. Reputation is gone, trust is gone, and very rarely can you get it back.
And so with that, Vanessa, so you're mentioning the risk word, which of course there are lots of people on the call who will start smiling to themselves because they know I could go off down a fantastic avenue. Because, and I mean, I think with regards to this, so of course, in my other role in life, in terms of being a consultant and Satala, we set Satala up back in 2014 as a risk management consultancy. And that was there almost as the Trojan horse to get things like sustainability, technical aspects, all of those areas, including the financials, but roll them together and then say, so what? Be, you know, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever, and be able to push that through. And the reason why risk management was that kind of the vessel in which to put it is because risk management is a core part of accountancy reporting. It's cited in almost every single regulation, etc., that's out there. And that's great because it gives you that platform to then go, hello, everybody. Let me now share what we think is going on. But one of the interesting aspects there is that if in that audit and risk committee, the person who is kind of holding the pen or the microphone or whatever at that moment is only an accountant, and actually going back to the scoping question earlier, is only thinking that the material risks are the ones that have a large financial hurdle. Mm-hmm. Something that I think is interesting at the moment is then how do you get that individual to think more broadly, to say it's not just money that we're measuring things in, there's the people, there's the planet aspects as well. How are you seeing that change and evolve at the moment?
Well, one of the roles that I've taken in my career has been sort of as trying to knit together the financial reporting and the non-financial reporting functions, and actually doing that within a Big Four firm as well. So we had the teams, and I absolutely agree. So I have been sort of effectively taking a pot shot at the sustainability function here and saying, get your act together, get some discipline around it, make sure that you can justify and report on and have a whole lot of governance and control over the information that you're producing. By the same token, I would say the opposite to, well, not the opposite, but I would say the parallel to accountants is stop pretending that this is real and that your world of money and things in spreadsheets is the only thing that, not only the only thing that matters, but the only thing that's real, because it's not even real. So, who are you kidding? And you need to step out of, and you need to walk into these worlds. And actually with the emphasis in the TCFD and in Australia with the AASB's guidance on reflecting climate change impacts in the financials, you were starting to see that. And it's really interesting being in the room for that, because you just get like, they twitch and they turn and the accountants are just like so uncomfortable with this process. But once they've been through it, and then, we're a couple of years down the track now, and now they're all over it. And they're absolutely, talking about things like adaptation risks and, the RCP 8.5 and, the whole thing. They've just absorbed it and it's become part of what they consider. So it's not impossible.
And I think that's really exciting because, again, so from that trust perspective, so you've got that profession that is trusted, even though the deep, dark secret is that what they're doing isn't real. Because actually what they're doing is reflecting, they're almost kind of, I guess, like a bridge across to what is real, or the interpretation of what is real, that's what's out there. So as a geologist, I'm looking at a rock and an accountant says to me, great, how much is in the ground? And I look at them and say, well, on this hand, it could be that, and on that hand, it could be this. And depending on that accountant, they will either go for the little number, a middle number, or the big number, invariably the big number if you're trying to pump the valuation. But I think this is really interesting, because does the person at the end of the day who's then saying, hey, do I want to buy your asset? Who do they believe more? The accountant or the geologist? Probably the accountant, who doesn't actually understand how good the original numbers were. So it's really interesting translation.
There's a collective delusion. I mean, it's where I think, it ties to behavioural economics as well, where everyone suddenly went, do you mean people are making these decisions? Like people with
don't trust
people
them,
who can be really stupid, and people who make irrational decisions, and people who panic because everyone else seems to be running that direction, and they think, oh God, maybe I should too. And to anyone outside of that world, it's blindingly obvious, but you've had 100 years of empirical evidence that markets are not rational.
Yeah.
But, people are uncomfortable with that, so they ignore it.
I'm loving that collective delusion, but let's all trust the accountants. And if in doubt, just all jump into a pit with a load of crocodiles. Fabulous. Excellent. So
that's the takeaway.
That's the takeaway. There are many more takeaways, by the way, everyone. So please listen to this recording again afterwards. Vanessa, thank you so much for that. Absolutely brilliant. Round of applause. Thank you, Vanessa. Fantastic. So moving from that world of trusted accountancy, not the delusion bit, the trusted the accountancy, across into the world of some rocks, or at least exploring for where those rocks come from. And I'm so glad to welcome to our virtual platform the fantastic Libby Sharman. Round of applause for Libby. Now, Libby, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and then I will be ready with some questions later. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah, and everybody. So my name is Dr. Libby Sharman. I'm the technical lead for BHP's Explore program. I'm a geologist by training, and I've worked across the junior sector, communications, community engagement, research, and now have spent 6 years with BHP. What I'm going to talk to you about today is the BHP Explore program. And you might be wondering a little bit about this, but the reason I wanted to share this today is because the key premise of this program is partnerships. If I can get my presentation mode to kick in. There we go. So that's what I want to discuss to you today, is how we are looking to accelerating discovery for the ore deposits that are going to see us into the future in terms of mineral resources from a BHP perspective. This is my version of Josh's slide around all of the disclaimers and notes. You can read it later on the recording. And I'm going to start off with a quick note in case somebody doesn't know who BHP is, and I think that Josh also raised that point really well. We are a global mining company based across more than 90 different locations with over 80,000 employers and contractors, and that number probably has actually gone up in the last week with our merger with OZ Minerals. Currently, we mine copper, nickel, potash, iron ore, and met coal. But that is our global picture. What I want to talk to you today is our exploration pipeline, particularly the very early stages of that pipeline. And what do I mean by pipeline? This is a very broad way of visualizing it. I'm going to just stick my pointer on here. The way we look at this within BHP is we have three broad areas of the pipeline that talk about how mature a exploration project is. You have the concept stage. This is really the ideas early stage piece of work where you may not have even picked up any ground or held any tenements, but you're looking at a particular area saying, I think this is good for this particular mineral or metal. Within BHP, we feed projects into this part of the pipeline through our regional generative teams and our global geoscience team. Moving on, we have the target stage of the pipeline, and that's where we really start to focus into places where we think are of the highest interest. We start to do more detailed work around geophysics, geochemistry, maybe some drilling. And within the company itself, we have our country teams who work on this, and we bring external projects into the pipeline through our new opportunities team. And then finally, you move on to the stage where you think you've got a pretty good idea that a deposit is there, and you're putting a lot of drilling into the ground. You're doing a lot of work on it. You're working up the economics of it, all of the sort of above ground commercial aspects of it. And here, the country teams do that work for us internally, and then we have a business development group who looks to identify those opportunities. And eventually, the hope is that these things lead to a discovery. Hopefully, what you've identified right now and what I skipped over is this big gap at the beginning of the pipeline, and this is really where BHP Explore fits in. And Explore came about because we saw the opportunity we saw this gap, so we saw this business opportunity, and we wanted to know how could we bring in early stage concept driven exploration projects, which are the ones that usually struggle to get traction because of their risk profile. They might be in jurisdictions that maybe we're not that familiar with. They might not have the geological evidence that we would normally associate with wanting to make an investment. But they are the place where the biggest gains are being made in terms of discovery opportunities. So how can we access that? And the solution we came up with was the Explore program, and it is very much based on a partnership approach. So how could we reach out to these early stage concept driven companies, and by providing them a variety of different resources and a partnership relationship, help accelerate their projects to a point that we would want to bring them into the BHP pipeline and keep developing them into the future. There's a few key pillars to what that partnership looks like. We have a accelerator program, which is a 6-month program. We're right now in month 5 of that 6 months. And that program is a combination of coaching, technical coaching, where we talk about things like our mineral systems approach, operational coaching, where we focus a lot on ESG, risk, community engagement, why those things are important to consider at a very early stage. So how do you actually build those partnerships with the communities you're going to be in and with the jurisdictions you're going to be operating in? And then business coaching, which discusses things like developing strategies and how do you look at the long-term plans of your project. How do you think not just about the next year, but the next 5 years, and looking at various options. The program comes with a $500,000 grant, which is to support the company as they move through the program. And then the other side of the partnership is access to BHP, our internal network of experts, and also a network of partners, vendors, suppliers, all of these sorts of things. We actually organized a day where the different cohort companies were able to meet with all sorts of different vendors that we brought into one place and discuss all of the potential tools and avenues that they might be able to pursue in development of their projects. And then we're coming up actually on the sort of next key piece, which is the opportunity for capital funding, where some of the companies in the program will have the opportunity to pitch for additional investment and actually pursue a commercial partnership with BHP. And that's where they officially become part of that pipeline, with an investment structure that is of mutual agreement. So, you know, that again, working for something that is of benefit to both BHP and the cohort companies. And really the end goal for us is that it is a long-term relationship that continues beyond the program and beyond whether or not we invest in any particular project. So how have we supported their journey as an early stage company, and how can they become partners of choice for us going forwards? In order to fill this program, we actually went out with a completely open global call for applications. This was happening back in September of last year. We received about 250 applications. About 2/3 of those came from groups or established companies, and about 1/3 of them were with individuals. And we got applications from across all 6 of the continents that we wanted to receive applications from. I think Antarctica would have been a stretch for a number of reasons. We were happy to receive applications, everything from individuals through to full organizations. And we really didn't have that much in the way of requirements of what needed to be in place. So at minimum, you needed a concept, an idea, that sort of amazing next thing that was going to drive our next big discovery, and geological data to back up your assertion. It would be great if you had tenements and an exploration plan, but it wasn't required. And we definitely didn't have any requirement for operational readiness. And that application process, as I said, yielded 250 applications. We did select 7 companies into the program. I will end with those 7 companies before I let Sarah grill me on questions. But just to, go through the program again, which we are right now in the depths of. We've been organizing masterclasses for the cohort across all of those 3 pillars of technical, operational, and business. The most recent technical one was architecture mapping and how you can use that in your mineral system. All of the cohort have been leveraging the vendor network that we've introduced them to be able to advance their projects. And the business readiness has been fantastic. Even from me, I've not really thought about business strategy and how it applies to junior companies, and looking at where you want to play, how you're going to win, all of those sorts of things, which has been a fantastic piece of the journey to go on with the cohort. And as I said, the program will end with a final event at the end of June to highlight all of the participants' exploration opportunities. So who are our 7 first cohort? They are a multi-commodity group with a global footprint. We have 4 nickel-focused companies and 3 copper-focused companies. Just quickly, Tutume Metals is a private company with ground secured in Botswana, looking at nickel sulfides undercover. Impact Minerals and Redox Copper are both in Australia. Impact is public and Redox is private. One of them is trying to find the undiscovered copper under Broken Hill, which for those of you who don't know, the BH in BHP is Broken Hill. So there is quite a nice symmetry to that. Apart from the absolutely fantastic geological motivation that they have behind it. Redox has got a sedimentary copper play. Bronzite is a very early stage company based in Canada with a project up on Somerset Island. Nordic Nickel and Kingsrose are both nickel focused companies in the Fennoscandian region, but one who is actually drilling off a potential deposit and the other who is looking at regional prospectivity scale opportunities. And then last but by no means least, Asian Battery Minerals is a Mongolian-based company with a nickel opportunity in the southwest of the country. I have had the privilege of working with these 7 companies for the last 5 months and partnering with them on their journey and seeing the progress and accelerated nature of their opportunities with this program. And it's just been an absolutely fantastic way to see how approaching junior companies with the attitude of how can you help us and how can we help you yields so many benefits in terms of how we can make the next discovery for global commodity requirements. And you can find out more on our website. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Libby. Absolutely fantastic. As always, round of applause for the wonderful Dr. Libby Sharman. Excellent. So, Libby, with regards to the companies that are involved in this, has there been anything as you progressed through the last 5 months, and indeed when they were actually applying to be part of the scheme, that they were surprised by, that BHP was saying, no, this is really important, and they were saying, no, that's not important to exploration, we've never seen that before, or anything like that? Is there anything that surprised them?
So there's a couple of things. I'll start with the technical one because that's sort of the one where I sit most comfortably. What they were most surprised about initially was what our how we define success in the program. So often there is a perception by junior companies when working with majors is that the only thing a major wants is to see drill results. And you haven't had a success if you've not drilled a significant mineralized intersection. And I think one of the biggest surprises for all of the cohort companies was us saying to them, no, that's for us, that's not where we expect you to get to in 6 months. Some of you will, but that's not actually appropriate for all of your projects. And then that comes to the second sort of piece which surprised them, which was we have placed a lot of emphasis on that above ground risk component, community engagement, environmental considerations, governance, sustainability, and sort of saying to the companies, we want you to be doing that properly and making sure that is in place. And so that may mean that you're not drilling in 6 months because it won't be appropriate. But it also may be that from a technical perspective, we want you to step back and do a whole load of other work for you to think about your opportunity. And something I want to emphasize here, and it does go back to that message of collaboration, we presented them tools and ways of working that we use, but they were presented as suggestions and tools for them to take and use that worked for them rather than any kind of mandated work program or that sort of, this is the way BHP does it and this is the way you will do it. That's not the approach we took because that doesn't actually lead to positive outcomes. It's the same as any stakeholder relationship. You need to build that trust and that partnership together. And that comes from dialogue rather than mandates.
And so with this, Libby, so there was the So I think this is fantastic because, again, working with lots of exploration companies, and they invariably say, oh, we're too early for ESG. And it's like, no, you don't understand. You have to be doing this all the way from the start. And just because you're not being asked about it yet by investors or potential buyers, it's really important for that bigger picture. In terms of the reverse then, Libby, because we've heard quite a lot, especially earlier on in the week, about things like beneficial ownership, transparency and everything, because there's a huge amount of trust between BHP and the partner organizations. And so what's been the process to make sure that the organizations are adhering to all of those normal transparency, sustainability, et cetera, principles that you would expect? So that kind of vice versa approach.
So a lot of it has come through continuous communication, coaching, reviewing work plans with them. Again, it is that thing that we can't make any of these companies do these things. But what we've focused on is helping them understand why they should do them, why it will make them more investable, and giving them that sort of clarity of this is something they should be doing because it is good for them and it's going to set them up well in the future. And that way, you know that it's something they're doing because they want to do it, not because they've been told by someone to do it for 6 months, and that if they leave the program without an investment, they're just going to go back to doing whatever they want. So again, helping them understand that importance of relationships and engagement and sustainability and all of those key pieces that really mean that they're setting themselves up for success in the future.
Fantastic. And so with this then, Libby, so I'm assuming as well with that, in terms of the rest of the world, looking at what BHP is doing. So if you think, okay, let's put on some of the other big mining companies, so Rio Tinto or Anglo American. See, I'm just showing Josh that I know some of the big mining companies just to skew that data set. There we go. What kind of reaction have you had from some of the others? Do they think this is just BHP trying to snaffle some early stage exploration, or do they see it for how you've been describing it and say, no, this is a partnership, this is about improving how those exploration companies are actually doing their thing, and they're maintaining their independence from BHP? What's the kind of reaction against the other people been, if you've heard it?
So look, I can't speak for any of our fellow companies. What I can share with you is some of the comments we've received back from the cohort companies who have obviously been out there and attending various investment shows and all of these things as they do normally. From their feedback, the reaction has been incredibly positive from our competitors and from the market in general. There is a comment that it is long overdue, that seeing the majors trying to find avenues to better support the junior industry and early stage exploration is a good thing. I think there's probably quite a few people waiting to see, are we going to be able to make those investments? Are we going to be able to take this to the full journey? But from what we have heard from the cohort feedback, it has been received positively, and it's also been received in the intent that we designed it, which is that piece of, yes, it is getting us exposure to these opportunities and these projects, but it is also working with the junior exploration industry to also make it overall a more successful industry.
Fantastic. Thanks, Libby. Final question, and then I promise I'll let you go. If you were to run this again, so I don't know if you've got another cohort that's beginning to be thought about, is there anything that you would do differently with regards to, be it that open call for companies at the beginning or anything else that's involved with the project?
So we are thinking about running it again. That's still obviously an ongoing discussion internally with various approvals, but we are thinking of running it again. And to be honest, we were so impressed by the response from companies and individuals to the open call that we really can't see why we would do it any differently. You know, the quality of the projects and the sort of awareness of where we got projects from, which were, you know, I consider myself to have a fairly good understanding of the global sort of exploration landscape, and we were seeing projects from places that I just wouldn't have considered, and that's part of the point of this. There are some probably minor tweaks we'll make. One of those things is communicating out to applicants a little bit better what we're hoping for in each of the different parts of the application, so that they are better able to fill in those applications. And then there's a few other things, but in general, that openness produced a really good response. And so there, you know, for that reason, I think if we do get approval to do it again, that's what we'll be looking at.
Fantastic. Well, Libby, good luck with everything, and good luck to all the companies for that final stage of the program. It's an absolutely fantastic initiative. So thank you very much and good luck. Round of applause.
Yep, thank you so much for the time today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Libby. Fantastic. Great. So we're on to our next fabulous speaker, who is coming to us again. We've got another Australian theme that's going on here, which is truly awesome, especially given that it is now well and truly Friday evening in Australia. So massive thank you to all of you with regards to that. Our next speaker is the fantastic Anna Carballo from Transparency International Australia. And I believe that Anna is going to speak to us a little bit about, well, what does the energy transition actually mean for the mining sector? So everybody, please put your hands together for Anna. Round of applause. And I'll let Anna share her slides.
Thank you so much. I have some slides. I'm going to try and keep this kind of short so we have a little bit of a time for that dialogue later. But thank you so much for the opportunity of being here. For those of you who don't know what Transparency International is, we are a global movement that works against the fight, that works against corruption. So there is about over 100 chapters or offices all over the world. And I lead the Accountable Mining Program, which is a global program that is specifically dedicated to work on governance within the mining industry. And we have worked with over 23 countries, and we work on a range of issues from promoting governance and transparency and accountability measures across the value chain, particularly thinking in terms of community engagement with governments, community participation, and business integrity. We work with a lot of companies as well. So I thought that would give a little bit of an outlook of what we are doing, and we have been working. The global program, the Accountable Mining Program, is based in Australia, and we have been working here for since 2016. We have what I was going to talk to you today is a report that we released last year at the end of November, so it's relatively recent, that looks a little bit about what are the main risks and governance risks associated with the emerging energy transition, particularly affecting the way in which it will affect the mining sector. I am sure a lot of these statistics for here are going to be well and truly known, but what we are seeing is an increase in exploration and an increase in projects all over the world connected to the energy transition, because, as most of you, I am sure, are very well aware, clean energy technologies are actually very mineral intensive, and so we can see a really high demand of critical minerals. And we are overall expecting, well, the International Energy Agency expects at the very least, and a conservative estimate of a fourfold increase of overall mineral demand by 2040 if we are to keep our Paris commitment. So of course this is one of the issues, is that we are currently, I'm just considering that you're seeing the current slides, right? No.
Yeah,
you're seeing the slides.
Yeah,
perfect.
Yeah.
because I'm working with two screens and sometimes I show the wrong screen. Okay, excellent.
It's perfect.
So great. So one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that while there is going to be an overall increase in demand across the mining industry, this is going to look very differently across different minerals, and these minerals are obviously located in very different jurisdictions. And the volatility of the demand and unevenness of the demand and the way in which it will increase across different minerals is one of the areas in which we will see, or we are seeing, a lot of governance challenges emerging. This is because while the overall demand is increasing, this is in some minerals, for example, lithium, people are talking about the emergence of a wide gold rush, or the emergence of a new rush for minerals, because we are expecting to see a 42 times increase by 2040 in the demand of lithium. And this is the report that I was mentioning, where we are trying to analyze and understand what are the main trends that we need to keep an eye on, and what are the policy recommendations that we have for the different stakeholders involved, from the communities all the way to companies and governments. We would need to try and understand what this will mean in the on the ground with the expansion of this project. And as I was saying, as this minerals are distributed, the reserves in all over the world, and while there are constantly new reserves being found and in exploratory projects like the one that we were just seeing from BHP, a very large percentage of the current known reserves are located in countries with weak governance credibility and weak governance ratings. And this is a graph that you can see here of the percentage of energy transition minerals located in countries which are considered to be having higher levels of corruption, according to the measurements that Transparency International does. That I'm sure you have heard of, the Corruption Perceptions Index that is published annually. And this, of course, is an issue because we are not only seeing an increase of projects all over the world, but also an increase in weak jurisdictions. But the rapid growth of demand, weak governance jurisdictions, to be more precise, but the rapid growth of demand for these minerals is not only increasing in these weak governance jurisdictions, but it's also bringing some speculative, or can increase some speculative behavior, both from established players willing to enter into these weaker governance jurisdictions, but also by more involving, by the appearance or the emergence of more junior miners being involved, or more stakeholders that do not have the sufficient anti-corruption capabilities, or not, they don't have enough experience to enter this field. In 2021, for example, we saw that junior miners, most of which have yet to produce any significant amounts of minerals for lithium, raised $500 million in investment in only 3 months, when it previously had taken almost 3 years to reach that level as well. So we are seeing that the emergence and the markets and the markets of specific minerals is rapidly heating up, and some of these new players that are entering the market are not sufficiently prepared to cope with the challenges that are of entering these high-risk jurisdictions. We are also seeing, which is also quite problematic, or quite, I guess, concerning, we're also seeing a lot of fast-tracking of projects and strategic initiatives for the sector for critical minerals or green transition minerals. And we can see a lot of governments pushing, or initially in 2021, in late 2021 and 2022, a lot of these initiatives were also connected to the need to rebound the economic growth after the pandemic. But in general, we are seeing a very clear interest from governments all over the world to facilitate the expansion of green mineral transitions. And I'm talking about, for example, the recently created European Critical Raw Materials initiatives, or the calls from the Australian government to facilitate or to promote critical minerals. And this is by no means only exclusive to Australia. We see this kind of, or Europe, we see this kind of initiatives all over the global north and the global south. We in the report, you will see that there is a discussion of a lot of these tools. The Canadian and the US Chambers of Commerce, for example, issued statements to call their governments to strengthen their critical mineral strategy and introduce incentives to support their national mineral industries. Some governments have also created special licensing processes to try and facilitate and ensure that there is a smooth running of the projects leading to the extraction of green minerals. And this, of course, is a very high risk. Well, of course, it's understandable when we need to try and match a demand that is growing. It's a red flag in order to ensure that all the required measures to ensure that that the corruption challenges are addressed are given the time sufficient to be implemented properly. The fourth trend that we discuss is the increase of the state participation both in the extraction and the processing of the value chain, which in and of itself is not necessarily a problematic issue. However, it can heighten corruption risks, particularly when state agencies are both responsible for extracting and at the same time for monitoring and clearing the processes of issuing new licenses and approving new projects. We see that there are a lot of risks that are of emerging corruption hotspots, especially in the context of increased pressure and competition in the market. We see a lot of initiatives from governments, both participating directly in projects or creating local contact requirements that can heighten this risk associated to state-owned enterprises, including bribery or other kind of corruption malpractices. And the last one that I also wanted to discuss, which is connected to the fact that some of these jurisdictions are high risks. Some of these high risks are not only associated to the levels of the legal frameworks or the weak governance institutions, but also they can be connected to other tensions. For example, tensions connected to food insecurity or conflicts or ecologically fragile environments. There's a recent study that was conducted by the University of Queensland, the Sustainable Minerals Institute, that looked at 5,000 new projects for critical minerals and found that almost 70% of all these projects were located in lands of Indigenous peoples and peoples connected to the land, which of course are more vulnerable to being able to participate and have their rights respected during the consultation processes. There are also, for example, 80% of the lithium projects are located in areas of Indigenous peoples, and a lot of, and almost 2/3, I think, are connected in areas that are with water scarcity. So the investments in these locations can exacerbate some of the social, political, and environmental tensions, even in areas where we have higher risks, higher governance standards. And so just to finish, I think what we try to discuss in the report is try to understand in which ways we can mitigate some of these challenges and how can we think of possibilities to both meet the demand that we are seeing, but also ensuring that our governance standards are maintained, and to prevent that a new resource course will emerge to some of these countries. And I think one of the main issues is here to ensure that community consultation processes are robust and inclusive throughout the entire process, throughout the entire value chain. We need to ensure that communities are engaged and are able to monitor as well and to participate throughout the lifetime of a mine, from exploration all the way to the closure. We need to improve transparency and accountability requirements for the mining sector, for like ensuring that standards like the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative standard are maintained. And we need to take steps to strengthen that our anti-corruption measures are strong across the entire mining sector. And I think that would be it from me, Sarah. I tried to keep it to 10 minutes, but I think I went a little bit over.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Anna. Round of applause, everybody, for the fabulous Anna Carballo. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Anna, I cannot share enough with you actually how useful these reports are to people. I know a lot of people who have their nose inside them the whole time, and it's not just this one, but I think there was a previous report, a corruption report as well, I think, that is available. And then, am I correct in saying you've got like a business integrity tool that's been put together
we have
as well?
Yeah, so we have like the entire program has a series of reports on different areas. This was just on the energy transition and critical minerals, but we work across the entire cycle of the value chain, and we have a lot of reports on different countries, country level reports, but also, as you well are mentioning, we also have tools specifically designed to work within the company. So we have worked, for example, we have worked with a lot of companies using them to try and help them understand whether their anti-corruption capabilities are strong enough and where they can be strengthened, or where they can be, where there are gaps that they can issue. So yeah, I think the website has been shared, but otherwise, yeah. I'd be happy. I think I put my email, but I would be happy to connect with anyone who's interested in partnering with us.
Yeah, no. So I think Ludovine has already preempted you and put the website into the chat, because she's one of the individuals who says, yes, I use these reports the whole time, which is great. And Anna, just a question. So from your perspective, in terms of saying, look, this is what's going on, and here are some of the potential threats and opportunities with regards to us getting this right. Actually, treading that line can sometimes be quite difficult, because depending on different stakeholders, sometimes people think, okay, hang on a second, you work with industry, so therefore you must be pro-industry, or you work with other NGOs, or you work with governments, etc. How do you find kind of, again, being able to be neutral in that space, and the perception of other people who may kind of go, oh no, well, you're not saying what I want you to say? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I think it is a complicated space to be in, for sure. And we have, Transparency International has always prided itself in being an organization that looks into partnering and collaborating with every stakeholder involved. So we work with communities. We have a lot of projects at community level. We work with governments. We work with a lot of companies. We work with international organizations. Sometimes this has led to some situations of tension, because some of these stakeholders sometimes have very conflicting views, and yet they are both willing to work with us. So we sometimes have been in that situation of having to mediate, but we strongly believe that engaging with a variety of stakeholders and providing a space to discuss and to improve this conversations, and to ensure that everybody is having a space to promote their perspective is very important, to ensure accountability. Particularly ensuring that the spaces are inclusive, that they're inclusive across different communities, and that we give everyone the opportunity to present their cases, I think.
So is that a situation then where, because you are a trusted partner of those different stakeholders, you can almost provide the bridge and begin to get them to listen to one another? Or we try,
and sometimes, and it may look very different in different occasions, right? Because sometimes we work with communities that, and we put forward the demands of the community quite strongly in front of stakeholders that are not necessarily paying sufficient attention to them. Sometimes this looks also into facilitating dialogue with these communities from government initiatives, or we have had So we have, it really depends also in the country project and in the country we're working on. So we had, for example, people working at artisanal scale mining in Zimbabwe, but we also have an initiative working with the parliament with the Congress in Mongolia, creating with a chamber of commerce. While in Colombia, the chapter works a lot with the companies as well. So it really depends on in which area we work. And but yeah, it is a complicated space sometimes to occupy.
Complicated but fascinating. So
I know it is very useful, I believe.
It is indeed. It is useful. We can confirm that. So brilliant. Thank you so much, Anna. It's been brilliant, and I'm pretty sure that everyone has already clicked on your website and will be there taking a good look at all the reports if they haven't already done so. So everyone, please put your hands together for the fabulous Anna.
Thank you so much.
And of course, cheers, Anna. Brilliant. And this takes us, we're almost there, everybody. We're almost at the end of this year's conference. And our second last speaker, because yes, Ludovine, I'm still going to call you a speaker when we try and summarize what it is that we've heard over the last few days. But our second last speaker is the phenomenal Barbara Dissinger, who is the founder of International Women in Mining and has been involved within many different aspects of raw materials for, I'm going to say, a number of years, Barbara, because whilst you've got huge experience, you look so lovely and beautiful and young. It's fantastic. So I'm going to welcome Barbara Dissinger to our virtual platform and hand over to Barbara to introduce herself. And then we've got a couple of questions to discuss. So thank you very much, Barbara.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good evening, regardless of where you're based. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Sarah. So, yes, I am the director of IWIM, a global nonprofit which is pursuing gender equality in mining. And towards our aim of leading global change for social sustainability in the industry, we work with a multitude of stakeholders on different initiatives, and we're supported by a global team and board. And we're really excited about this project and this topic that you're bringing up today of trust.
So with that, Barbara, from your experience, what does trust actually look like?
It's an interesting conversation, trust, at the moment, isn't it? In a world full of, I don't know, fake news, algorithms pitting one side against another, toxic messages left, right, and center. So do we still believe in trust, right? Do we still believe in humanity? For us, trust is sharing the responsibility for the work, the organization, the vision, and the sought after outcome. When companies share the responsibility for the land, the livelihood of communities, the safety and well-being of every person involved, and more, with the people and communities directly impacted by the operation, they are then building trust-based relationships. Trust looks like an open and honest dialogue where the parties can admit fault or lack of knowledge and be open to criticism and praise alike. Trust is when people bring their true, authentic selves to the workplace without having to modify their personalities to fit a predetermined mold. For women, this is when they can trust that their softer way of speaking, for example, or empathetic leadership and point of view is not seen as a fault, a weakness, or worse, a nuisance. So, for example, we want to foster, at IWIM, we seek trust through inclusive participation and representation of all people at all levels, from entry to executive. And we want to foster trust by making sure we're an advocate for a number of things, like making sure that everybody feels safe and supported in their environment, regardless of their gender, that everybody has access to equal pay and benefits in the sector, and that none of them are prone or can be a victim of violence and sexual harassment and discrimination because of their gender. So we feel that trust is really strengthened when everyone has access to skill development programs and career development, and everybody, be there men or women, can work together and have access to all opportunities.
So it's just a little thing then.
Yeah, just a tiny little thing.
And so, Barbara, With regards to, so I mean, I know that you speak a number of different languages, for example, and as well through IWIM, working with people all over the world. Does trust tend to vary between different cultures, or that expectation of what creates trust? Is there any variation there, or does it actually all boil down to the same thing?
No, I think it is expressed in different forms, in different cultures and traditions, actually. And our beliefs about what trust means. So, for example, what I said trust means to me may not mean the same to somebody else. And that's a difficulty, I think, around trust. So our beliefs about what trust means and how that is conveyed to another person can have a broad range of nuanced differences. So I find you soon realize when working with people from different cultures that things can get awkward, or that you thought you got on really well and then you never hear back what happened, or, you know, when to spend longer time asking how their family is doing, or when to go straight down to business. That in some countries you spend 3 hours at lunch and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? And in others you keep working while you eat together a snack really quickly in a hurry. So all scenarios can be misinterpreted and seen as lack of respect by the other person, depending on where they're actually from. So we see that people tend to develop trust in two ways, either by being confident in someone's skills and experience, which is developed from professional interactions and is really more intellectual in nature. So I trust you, Sarah, because you are a professional, you're reliable, you deliver on time, you're very knowledgeable, etc. Or you develop trust via feelings of emotional closeness and empathy, right? So you will mostly have this relationship with family and friends. It comes from the heart and says, because I sense mutual affection and love, getting on together and feeling reciprocity, therefore I trust you. So in many countries, this last type is not just for family and friends and personal relationships, but also for business. Whereas in other parts of the world, mixing the two is seen as very unprofessional. So, for example, if you take countries like India, Brazil, China, Saudi Arabia, or Nigeria, to name some, separating the two can indicate a lack of sincerity and therefore trust. And for people of those countries, business is actually personal. It is especially linked to an individual, for example, rather than the company or organization that you work for, and the relationship can continue regardless of where that individual is working. In contrast, in North America and Northern Europe, relationships are defined by functionality or practicality. So you reduce emotional closeness as much as possible, and it's seen as really not okay. And if you work globally, it helps investing time, I would say, in nourishing relationships to build trust, regardless of what culture the person you deal with is from, as it always pays off, I believe, as a good investment. It's not necessary to be face-to-face to develop good relationships. It's also possible to do that virtually. And, you know, if you are too cautious or too politically incorrect, holding yourself back, because that's the right thing to do where you're from. For others, you can come across as not authentic, not showing the real you, and therefore you aren't trustworthy. So accepting to go for dinner or join for drinks, letting your guard down, allows others to see who you really are, and that helps build the trust in some countries. So if you're wondering if wining and dining is worth more than getting down to business, it helps to know that in many cultures, the relationship is your contract, and that both are totally linked. I would say, as we're talking in a mining sort of a conversation, most producing countries are in emerging markets, and many of them are in relationship-based countries. So it helps to find out more where the country culture you work with is sitting on trust, feedback, hierarchy, negotiation, etc. And I can recommend an excellent book which goes into all of this in absolute detail, and all of you may have read it or know it. It's The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. But being emotionally and culturally intelligent requires awareness and practice. If it doesn't come naturally to you, or you are from countries at both extremes, once you know more about the person and they about you, You can learn not to take offense at things that are cultural, not about the actual content or your message. And Sarah, it's not because I speak several languages that I necessarily excel at this. Far from it. I haven't always got it right. I made colossal faux pas along the way. I have increased my knowledge and my awareness, it is true, and I try to pay attention to it daily. However, it takes effort. I'm actually a very fact-based introvert who is also neurodivergent and likes a two-dimensional lens. So adding a third dimension of emotions, social and cultural construct and framework on top of that, which differs depending on who you speak to, is a real challenge. This difference in trust building is not only true between different countries or regions. Within the same city or locality, there are varying means of establishing trust-based relationships. Every community is different, and any community relation practitioner will agree that every group and every person is a universe in themselves, and dialogue is a tool and as a means to discover what trust means to them. And you need to always find out and ask the question. So this applies to employees as well, of course. We cannot assume that all engineers, all metallurgists, or geologists are the same type of person. And I'd like to greatly emphasize that there is an overgeneralization of how we speak and consider women. We are not all the same either. I'll stop here for now because I know I can go on for a long time.
No, it's fantastic, Barbara. And I'm loving that every person is a universe in themselves. So we're all unique. We all think and feel in different ways. But you brought up women as a whole there, and we've heard some fantastic stories earlier on in the week, such as Elevine from Malawi, who I'm sure you may well have come across, and so one of the things she's been doing is working with other women in African nations in that neighborhood, banding together to say, okay, how can we build some of the facilities that we might need for further beneficiation of our gemstones? And that's something where it's almost been that female network, and so people kind of saying, hey, let's band together and let's create something. I don't know if you've got any other case studies or examples of where what women can bring to the table sometimes to enhance levels of trust between groups that maybe don't trust themselves or trust one another at the moment. And one of the reasons why I asked that as well is so John Crawley, who spoke at the close of play on Wednesday, he was talking about the Northern Irish peace process and actually attributed the fact that actually it was the women that turned around and said, look, we don't like you guys getting blown up and hurt. Let's go and speak to one another. So what can women do beyond, of course, being absolutely phenomenal in themselves?
Thank you. Well, there are a lot of women in mining organizations around the world, as you know. They came about at different times for different reasons, but as we are talking about trust, maybe they came about because of trust or the lack of trust. Many female professionals realize that their skills and intellects may be underutilized, that they don't receive the same pay, are not safe, etc. So they then develop organizations around it to develop better tools or advocate for, better solutions, if you want. We ourselves would like to be out of a job and for IREM not to be needed, for example. For the industry not need or require specialized organizations to standardize the way organizations include women into the mining operations. I would say that, what women bring to the table, we get that all the time. And interestingly enough, I don't see men getting asked what they bring to the table. Yeah. They're just at the table. So I feel we need to stop asking these questions to change the dynamic. Don't ask permission to be here. Just take the space, sit down. Everybody, be they green, pink, or purple, tall or short, old or young, or whatever, can bring valuable contributions to the conversations. It is true that we have a different style of leadership. As you say, we don't want to see men blown up. Let's have a conversation. And maybe we're very good at that. As mentioned before, people trust others when they share common purpose or values, when there's honesty and authenticity. And women are people, they bring the same talents, perspectives, know-how, and insight as men and everybody else. So I think we need to change really this dialectic a little bit. Mixing genders and intersectionality within brings diversity of thought, leading to better decisions, creativity and innovation, which is not possible when there is groupthink. So I think that's really what organizations can, and women and all of civil society can bring to mining at the moment. What you've been discussing here over the last few days, long-term sustainability, climate change, responsible mining and supply chains, energy transition, decarbonization, and I don't know how many other challenges were mentioned that mining faces, they will all be solved with the best talent. Now, the best talent is actually diverse talent. And it's not doing the same thing with the same people and the same tools as you've done all the time. And mining needs to basically innovate. It needs to be bold, to do things differently with different people than it has done in the past, to seek and get at all of the solutions that it requires, and to ensure that people trust in this sector, which is essential, but unfortunately doesn't have the reputation it requires to be seen as for all of the benefits and the good stuff it brings. It too often, of course, we just look at it and at the bad stories.
Absolutely. And I think we've had a bit of discussion during this week in terms of that acknowledgement of the bad stories, but then also leaning into some of the good stories as well, in terms of being able to build some of those aspects of trust. So Barbara, final question, if I will, and I'm aware that you're involved in a number of the different international groups that are having lots of fantastic discussions, etc. at the moment. Are things changing? Are we going to be able to meet these challenges of the future? And also as well, do you see any changes that are focused on or maybe indirectly might be able to help build that trust between different groups of stakeholders?
Yes, no, absolutely. I think the focus on decarbonization, critical raw materials, is of great relevance right now, and we see that discussed all the time. We've attended conferences around that ourselves and participated, and it's absolutely relevant. You need everybody to be able to achieve sustainability, and so focusing on trust is key. We have been assisting in peer reviewing standards, recommendations for governments, focusing ourselves on a project called Inclusive Workplace Design, which aims to benchmark best practices, determine the means to establish and sustain inclusivity in large-scale mining, etc. So we've been doing a lot of work in that. But more broadly speaking, several things come to mind, and I know that we're sort of running out of time, but I think one thing that is important is to, for the different stakeholders, I feel that they're all talking at cross purposes, and there's a lot of judgment at the moment. So for example, the Global North is so focused on energy transition, it is struggling to understand that the Global South is not against it. However, its main objective is actually energy security, maybe at the moment. So you're all moving towards clean energy, and their transition is a complex process with several social and economic considerations. So they need to move, for example, from sort of not cooking with wood and waste, for example, resulting in indoor pollution and poor health. So they're looking at raising their standards of living, whereas you are already sort of really focusing on replacement of, fossil fuels to something else, right? And they're actually developing 400 new coal mines. So all of that is codependent in a way, and you would need, for you to succeed in what you're doing, you need the metals and minerals coming from mining producing countries, which happen to be in the Global South, right? So I find mutual understanding of these differences will be essential, and trust building in those will be essential. I think more scrutiny is a good thing. we've discussing a lot of alphabet soups and lots of standards, but I find that more reporting, audits, and certifications allow for greater transparency. And therefore, this allows to build greater trust and stakeholders' interests being respected. This is a positive impact for everybody. And also, I find investing in digital education, provision of internet in the global south allows mining communities to have better access to information education, and it will allow them to keep mining companies and suppliers accountable via apps on mobiles. I think that is something that a lot more investment needs to go into. Multi-stakeholder initiatives may take longer, but its results or outcomes are built on trust, again, solid foundations, and they're therefore longer lasting. I think more collaborations and partnerships in mining will be key to solve all of the issues in the sector. And be prepared to be uncomfortable. Own up to not knowing everything. Be aware of your own unconscious biases and that you have some, try and understand other cultures, be curious, ask questions, and don't overgeneralize. Every mining community is not the same, every person's not the same. And don't speak for those that aren't in the room, or don't write policy without consulting those it is for. I think that is crucial, and I see it very often at lots of conferences. And lastly, things shift all the time, right? What was true in January in mining may not be true in July. So don't be surprised by the fast pace of change. Thank you.
I'm loving it. Thank you so much for that, Barbara. And I'm going to be listening to this recording later and making lots of notes of that list, because as well, in terms of don't write policy without making sure you have the right people in the room, especially those people who are going to be impacted by it, was something that we really looked into yesterday afternoon in a very powerful way. But Barbara, thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us here today and sharing your wonderful insight. So thank you, Barbara. Round of applause. Fantastic.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. Awesome. So everybody, we're almost there. The only thing that stands between us and calling it a day on the 2023 Responsible Raw Materials Annual Conference, which of course has been focusing in on material value chains, the criticality of trust. See, it's taken me all week to be able to say that without making a mistake, but it's great. I've got there now. Is for Ludovine and myself to attempt to try and summarize some of what we have been up to over the last week, because there have been a great number of themes, be it single words that come back time and time again, but also different perspectives cited by very, very different individuals who are coming at this discussion from different angles, different perspectives, which I think have been absolutely fantastic. Now, succinctly, over the course of the last few days, we have had a total of 50 speakers from approximately 14 countries. And in terms of the diversity of those speakers, it's approximately 50-50 in terms of gender diversity, which is fantastic. We've had people who are accountants with no crocodiles, as far as I'm aware, nearby. We've had lawyers, we've had geoscientists and engineers, policymakers, we've had politicians, we've had students, we've had people who are retired from different aspects of the sector. We've had all manner of individuals all providing their input as to, okay, what do we think trust looks like within the raw materials space? But then also as well, drawing on case studies from outside of the raw materials space. What does it take to create trust where perhaps it hasn't necessarily sat traditionally, or where it has been broken in quite a severe manner? So with regards to trying to summarize what we're looking at, I'm going to hand over to Ludovine to share some of her thoughts, and then I shall attempt to build on what Ludovine says. Not that it's not already going to be perfect, but everybody, if you can please put your hands together for the phenomenal Ludovine Wouters. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow, pressure is on. Well, thanks, Sarah. I think what's interesting here, and the reason we initially discussed this theme of trust, is because when you think of it, criticality in and of itself is a challenge of trust. We have relied on systems we didn't understand, but fundamentally trusted to deliver what we needed, right? We used to think, as Josh said, you pick up minerals at B&Q, right? I personally don't know B&Q, but I had Amazon, same difference. And I think the the reality is that we suddenly realized a number of discourses, a number of narratives were becoming so dissonant that something was breaking down. So we stopped trusting the links to achieve certain objectives. We stopped trusting the systems we had accepted, even condoned before. A lot of the criticality narrative is shaped as a competition. This competition didn't happen overnight. I think Amanda was very right when she said, let's just remember how China did all this. Wasn't done without anybody's, information. It was right there. So I think the whole idea of criticality and trust, are in and of themselves a little bit of a major dissonance. The second thing that's interesting is that by definition, we are talking about incredibly complex, and I'm going to fail to say this word in English again, heterogeneous systems. I know. And the problem is very often when we see complexity, we think something must be hidden because I'm not seeing it all. Something must be different from my expectation because I can't grasp or test or challenge every aspect. A lot of the conversations that we've had this week were about embracing the complexity, which is a great thing to say. It's a very hard thing to do because it entails trusting ourselves to navigate something that's uncharted, or worse, chartered for others and uncharted for us. So I think that's another element here. And I'm particularly sensitive to that because a lot of my work over the last few years has been trying to connect parties and stakeholders who were not connected to mining at all, who frankly were very comfortable with minerals showing up at B&Q, and who suddenly are being told, no, we've placed our trust in you. You're going to deliver on that trust, as Jeff Townsend was saying, by making sure not only we have minerals, but they're the right minerals and they're sourced in a way that we agree with. So the shifting nature of expectations is a big part of this conversation as well. What we heard this week, and I want to right now take off my hat to Sarah and Rose, who through some miracle of, being amazing, seem to put together a program every year where some guiding thread emerging is from each session or day. On the first day, we definitely hit a lot of these context notes, embracing the complexity and navigating the conversations where we're talking about the same thing, but we're not actually really meeting each other's conversation line. The second day I thought was really interesting because in my view, almost everything we discussed came back to connections. There was a lot of discussion about how to make connections. There was a talk on reflective listening and a lot of really in-depth discussion on negotiation and processes that demonstrated the value of applying all of these techniques. What was interesting there, connecting to the first day, is the fact that time was obviously a factor. At a time when we are trying to navigate complexity with a sense of huge urgency, again, that's a trade-off right there. That's a decision to be made with no real understanding of the consequences. Do we take time to build trust? Do we run for emergency exits? Nobody quite knows. And of course, the real difficulty is there's no ultimate emergency exit because there's only one planet Earth. A lot of the conversations on, I want to say Wednesday, but of course it was Thursday. A lot of the conversations on Thursday, really interestingly, were all about transformation, transition, and change. how difficult change is, because whilst we all agree change is necessary, we would so much prefer it happen to somebody else. And navigating the complexities of change across cultures, across commercial dynamics, across value chains, is something that we discussed a lot yesterday, because I'm so sorry, my cat is joining us, which of course is perfect to round off the week, because the difficulty today is that a lot more people are trying to be, part of what mining and minerals, mean to a wide spectrum of stakeholders. The complexity is they're trying to grasp a sector which in and of itself is shifting at crazy pace. Whether you're talking about redefining how we finance things, which means that we reinvent business models. Kyle was talking to us about a lot of the work that's done by connecting communities to mining, not just as, let's make sure you're in agreement. No, you're actually part of the project. All the way to countries redefining how they pursue these goals. I think the masterclass that Carlos gave us on Chile, frankly, should be in front of almost every policy shaper I know. Because whilst everybody acknowledges the huge challenges, the opportunities are some opportunities at least are very clearly defined and targeted, and there's a lot of cohesive action towards those opportunities. Okay, so how do we all align around that? And I think it's really great because today what I heard was a lot of, all right, mining is shifting, but how do we connect to the people who care about us or who are interested in us? Whether it's Josh, basically pushing for labeling, which, by the way, is a big part of the conversation in situations where acceptability of minerals is starting to be tied to responsibility, and responsibility, one of the proxies is location, or, origin of some form. I love what Libby was telling us about BHP basically redefining one of the core mechanisms of how we operate, which is you find some cowboys, they lick some rocks, they get lucky, they stumble onto something, and then they hand it over to a big boy. Those dynamics, whilst awesome, and I can see Sarah enjoying the rock licking metaphor or reference, those models are also shifting. So I think throughout the week, we have covered a lot of ground. What I think is most complex now is to say, okay, there's a lot of goodwill. There are people who are really trying to understand each other and who are even willing to accept the consequences of change to themselves. Let's now make sure that we carry this through in a lot of the work we're doing, because at the moment, very few of these statements of principle are actually translating into action that's significant enough to change dynamics. And I just want to leave it on one last thing, not because Professor Ekin said it and he is just the greatest. But in all of these conversations and narratives, expectations are key. The expectations we place on ourselves, I think, are going to be increasingly more important than the expectations we place on others. The management of demand and rethinking what we really need and how we use it will be a big part of shaping tomorrow's picture. And it will influence how we finance this. It will influence how we design it. It will influence how we carry the business of mining and the entire value chain behind it. So maybe that's where the ultimate goal is. All of us to think about, when we talk about multiplying demand times 40, who are we kidding? There's no market where that happens. So that's what I'm thinking. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Ludovine. So just to build on what Ludovine has just said and reflect on that and picking up where you've left off. So yes, the scale of the problem. So I think what I've heard as well is that alignment on what is the challenge that we're looking at the moment, because the challenge means something different to everybody. And so being able to say, okay, what is the problem in the first place or the challenge? Let's call it a challenge because that sounds more optimistic than problem. What is the challenge that we're looking at with regards to raw material? What does it mean to each and every one of us? Because we all sit within our own universe. And are we actually talking about the same thing? Because often when we're speaking to one another, we're speaking about slightly different aspects. And I think, as Olivia put it a couple of days ago, the technology of today is not the technology of tomorrow. So as well, all of the discussions around what's on a critical minerals list, etc., it's all fairly academic, to be honest, and perhaps isn't necessarily the core of some of these challenges that we face. So that being number one, are we actually talking about the same challenge or are we inadvertently talking about different things, which happens so often by accident? The second thing is that from what I've heard this week, you cannot force trust. So this isn't an engineering problem. Yes, there are loads of tools and techniques that you can use. And Erin Meyer, I think, has been cited every single day this conference because yes, that book is phenomenal. It's great. So there's some fantastic tools, etc., out there that can be used, but it's not something where there's no equation for trust where you can say, okay, if I do this and this and this, my output is enduring trust. So it's not an engineered solution. But what we can do, of course, is collect a lot of that data, pull it together, attribute that data, and then challenge it and be able to say, okay, what are we actually looking at? And that was something that Amanda brought to the table yesterday as well. So what does trust mean? And I have the world's scrappiest handwriting here that I shall attempt to unravel. I know it's even worse than usual, Ludovine, who would have thought? So through the course of the week, I think we've heard the following words. So trust is all about respect and taking the time to actually understand one another. It's about bravery and courage to be vulnerable and to actually feel uncertain with regards to what we're looking at. It's about having empathy for one another and taking the time to truly understand who are you actually having a conversation with or doing business with. Do you actually understand the data, for example, that you're looking at? And what are the elephants in the room? Are we actually pointing our fingers at them, or are we all gleefully ignoring something that actually somebody needs to be brave enough to say, okay, this is lovely, but what about this thing that's over there? What's our shared interest, shared values, skin in the game? What is everybody actually in it to either win or to lose with regards to doing this? And I think that is something where yesterday, when Mark Palmer was talking about thin slicing, I thought that was really interesting. So people are only taking a very narrow scope of a problem, but the issue with doing that is then actually you miss the whole picture with regards to what's happening there. And we have to be able to look at the full picture. It needs a symphony of different techniques to be able to do it, because what works for one person or culture might not necessarily work for somebody else. And also it wobbles, in the language of Catherine McCallum. So trust wobbles, and we should expect it to wobble and not feel despondent when that trust wobbles, because the wobble says, okay, hang on, we need to talk, or we need to understand what's been going on there as well. And actually, I think with that, as individuals, we have to be able to have the choice to make trust wobble rather than feeling trapped by trust, which could perhaps come through. And that came from the discussion yesterday. So this is something here where we've all got something to bring to that table. And in the words of Barbara, just rock up and take your seat, because all of us need to be invited to that. And what we're aiming at here is that enduring and resilient trust that will change in its nature. But that's what we're going for. And of course, there are a huge variety of different approaches and things to bear in mind that we've collected through the conference over this past week. So I think with that, what we're going to very quickly do to round things off is, because we've still got some of our wonderful speakers from earlier on today who are here with us, I'm going to do a quick whip around the room from that quick summary that Ludovine and I have just given. Did anything resonate? Did you disagree with anything, or any final words of wisdom? And Shiv, I'm going to come to your wonderful self because you kicked off today's session. So we'll go to Shiv and then we'll go to Josh.
Thanks, Sarah. I think the main point that resonated with me was, I think one of the quotes is the technology of today might not be the technology of tomorrow. And that's completely true. Things will change as we progress with kind of new development, research, and technology, and things like batteries. The kind of development cycles are so quick. Things all happen in the labs, but we have to realize to actually get to kind of that mass scale will still take a long time. There's lots of new technologies which promise improve cycles, storage capacities, charge, etc. But to actually get to that point where things are going to be in our everyday lives will take a very long time to actually get to that level. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. And the need and demand for these minerals won't just disappear overnight. It will take a kind of a gradual phase out.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Shiv. So yes, exactly. So that the goalposts are changing all of the time, which is great to acknowledge. Josh, what do you reckon? And then we'll go to Anna.
So I think my takeaway from hearing your and Ludvine's summary is I'm actually quite positive about like what the future is going to hold. I think it's all looking good. Steps are being taken in the right direction, which is really nice. I think that also like kind of an inevitability that people in the public are going to start to find out about mining and its importance, whether that's through like news kind of saying the shortages of metals, or kind of maybe mining doing more of like a public campaign like oil companies have done to show themselves as more forward facing. But I think as an industry, because we're holding ourselves as to account to be more forward facing and be more considerate for the future, I think that is going to slowly start to be more kind of be made, people are going to become more aware of that, I guess. And I think as a result, I think trust will start to be built. People start to learn to trust mining companies, and for us to help source their metals responsibly. So that's kind of my takeaway.
Love it. Thank you very much, Josh. Anna, how about yourself? And then we'll go to Barbara.
Thank you, Sarah and Ludvine. This has been really a great panel. I haven't been able to be in a lot of the other sessions, unfortunately, because of the time difference, but today has been really great to hear everyone. I do have a cautious view on the future for the mining industry. I am keen on seeing the possibilities for the mining industry to raise to the challenges that we have, and particularly in the terms of trust. I think there are very important steps that we need to take to ensure that our trust is shared and the profits are shared as well as the costs, which I think is something that in order to ensure that trust is built and is long lasting, we need to engage with communities all over the world where the extraction is taking place and where the demand is coming from, to ensure that all this is shared across, and that will definitely build trust. But yeah, I am optimistic that we can rise to this challenge and that we can strengthen our governance to ensure that this is done responsibly and in a just and fair manner.
Awesome.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Anna. Brilliant. Barbara, how about yourself? And then I'm going to bring in Rose.
All of the things that all of you have said resonate. I feel mining has so many challenges, but there are also opportunities. I am maybe a bit more optimistic than Anna. I try to be positive. I find that the fact that mining is looking at all of these things, the sector is doing so much work in so many ways, and there's so much more onus on the mining sector than anything else. So although most people are not aware, and mining is this amazing secret kept, I think the sector is very innovative and leading the way in lots of transparency and lots of these conversations and lots of these stakeholder conversations that other sectors don't even do. So that's the positive that I see. But that doesn't take away any of the other things that have been said. And change is hard. It's much easier to say we're going to do change than do it. And mining, unfortunately, it takes 15 years to put a mine in place. So it's difficult, this thing, as Shiv was saying to us, Well, how do you then, well, if the technology in 15 years is different, so mining has to always work in being completely blind with what you know now. You need to, and there's billions of costs to commission a mine. So yeah, all of that is fascinating and will continue to be fascinating. And I believe in the humans working in mining. There's lots of amazing intellects and people involved that are passionate about what they do. So I think with all of that, there's enough there to build trusted relationships. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Barbara. I'm liking the way that this is finishing on a very, very happy and positive looking note, which is great. But Kieran, any final words of wisdom from your end, having sat and listened to the entirety of the conference? On you go, Kieran, and then we'll go to Rose.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to listen to the conference in its entirety and digest some of these talks and really try and understand it. And ultimately, I think the word is visibility of the industry. An example I'd give recently in the UK is a show called Country File, which I myself wouldn't ordinarily watch, except they covered the Cornish mining heritage and industry at the moment. So not only did they look at the past and some of those legacy operations, some of the legacy mines and how nature has taken over again, but also how mining is developing in that region. And it was just the fact that this was on BBC One in the UK, so it wasn't exactly pushed to the side. It was right at the forefront on a show that's extremely popular in the UK. And it was it's putting it back in the public eye. And I guess what's interesting is, the synonymous with mining is images like pickaxes, mining carts. When was the last time they were used? It's what do we really want the image of mining to be now? I think it's sort of reimagining and making sure that message of what mining looks like nowadays is pushed out to the public so people really see it for what it is. And then from there, maybe the job of rebuilding trust is easier because people's perception of the industry is actually more accurate to what is actually going on. So, not to reiterate what everyone else is saying, but just to reflect on making sure it's visible and accurate, precise. And so people really understand what mining actually is now.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Kieran. Fantastic. And Rose, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to end on a real high note, as Barbara did, because I think when we decided on the theme of this year's conference being trust, I don't think we were convinced we'd be able to fill a whole conference of people talking about that topic. It's something that makes people feel very vulnerable, and it's not something that I think typically geologists want to talk about. We're the kind of people who want to hide in a field with rocks, not talk about human emotions. The fact we've managed to fill a whole conference talking about it with people who have been so open and shared really different perspectives and different takes, I think is really positive. And I think that in and of itself shows that trust is something that is being thought about in the industry, whether it's clear to everybody from the outside or not. So I just want to say a massive thank you to everybody who has spoken, because trust isn't an easy thing to talk about. And it gets easier to do this every year. So it's not the easiest job in the world trying to coordinate people all over the world. And I would be lying if I said it was my favourite job. But it's always worth it at the end to create such a fantastic resource that I know so many people do get so much out of. So a big thank you to everybody. And I guess roll on next year.
Rose is the one who said it. So firstly, a massive thank you to Rose for pulling this off, because Rose is the one who pulls all of this together and does deserve all of the credit for all of this. But also thank you so much to all of our speakers, to Ludovine for also pulling a lot of these aspects together as well. And as Rose says, roll on next year. I wonder what we'll speak about then. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good one.
And thank you, Sarah, for hosting the whole thing with such enthusiasm, because I don't know how you're going right now. I'm hardly going, so I don't know how you are.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. Brilliant.